Well, good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. And welcome to today's educational hearing on the state of the video marketplace. I look forward to our hearing today from our witnesses who represent a wide range of viewpoints across the industry. The video marketplace is rapidly changing. For over half a century, Americans viewed video programming one way, on a television in their homes. But the advent of internet-connected TVs and devices allowed for the launch of streaming platforms to provide new choices for consumers beyond an over-the-air antenna, a satellite dish, or a cable box. Americans are no longer tethered to a rigid TV schedule. Today, viewers can choose where and when they watch TV, whether it's at home, on the go, or everywhere in between. This industry shift has ushered in an era of endless possibilities, redefining how we entertain, educate, and inform ourselves. Today, consumers have unprecedented access to high-quality content. Statistics show Americans' preferences are changing as streaming becomes an easy and affordable choice for Americans. For the first time, streaming providers claimed the largest portion of U.S. video viewership in July of 2022. At that time, streaming viewership represented 34.8% of TV viewership, while cable subscriptions represented 34.4%. In the same report published this month, streaming shares hit a new high of 38.7% of the TV viewership, while cable share was at 29.6%. This shows that consumers continue to cut their cable subscriptions and move to streaming, or in other words, are cutting the cord. Yet, as this media landscape has drastically evolved, the regulatory environment has largely remained the same. The Cable Act, which is over 30 years old, still provides the bedrock framework for TV regulations today. Burdensome regulations, including media ownership restrictions, retransmission consent, and other must-carry requirements, are just a few of the regulations constraining cable, satellite, and the broadcasters. With the introduction of streaming services, we must resist the temptation to impose more regulations in a competitive, innovative industry. The largely unregulated streaming marketplace has allowed platforms to flourish and to negotiate deals to provide Americans with unprecedented access to content from local broadcasters, television shows, movies, and other content. Rather, we should focus on deregulating an overly regulated industry instead of imposing archaic 1990s-era regulations onto a new and vibrant industry. It is our role in this committee to determine what is still working, where we can reduce regulations, and how we can support American viewing choice while ensuring local broadcast continues to thrive. Today's hearing is just the beginning of this conversation. With the various changes in the industry, this hearing provides an opportunity for Congress to learn about issues with laws and regulations pertaining to multi-channel video program distributors, MVPDs, like Comcast and DirecTV, and virtual MVPDs, MVPDs like Hulu, Live TV, FuboTV, and YouTube TV. The contrast between linear or scheduled TV and nonlinear, meaning on-demand content, and outdated laws and regulations that may no longer make sense for today's marketplace. I do look forward to our discussion today and thank our witnesses for their willingness to be here as representatives of their industries. And before I recognize my colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from California from the 7th District, for her opening statement, I just want to make one last statement. And I say this a lot about this committee. In our opinion, this is the greatest committee in Congress, the Energy and Commerce Committee. And one of the things I really have to always say about it is this: we look over the horizon 5 to 10 years, because that's where you are in a lot of cases. We can't go out there and think about enacting a piece of legislation or laws in general without knowing what's happening out there. So this is why it's so important that we have this hearing today. And with that, again, I recognize my good friend, the ranking member from the gentlelady from California's 7th District, for her opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those words, too, also, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing comes at a critical time for the video marketplace. Customer preferences and business models are changing quickly. Congress needs to keep pace, and this discussion provided a needed forum for that. The market we'll be examining today is in the middle of a profound sea change. The pandemic continued the trend that was already building in the video ecosystem. Consumers are steadily drifting away from traditional pay TV toward video on demand and other over-the-top services. By some estimates, 80 million households will have cut the cord by 2026. As more families cut the cord than maintain a pay TV subscription, the implications for the market will be significant. Business models will need to adapt, and regulatory structures must be scrutinized to ensure they're preventing consumer harms, because these macro changes are already being felt across the industry, especially by consumers, perhaps no more acutely than television blackouts. For anyone who's experienced a television blackout, they're pretty easy to understand. Consumers pay for something they never get. In almost any other industry, charging a customer or consumer for something that's not delivered would be unthinkable, and yet it's an experience that's all too common. You have friends over to watch the game, the big game, or your favorite show, but when you turn on the TV, nothing. Despite being billed and paying in full, nothing, no game, no show. And it's not just once. These blackouts can go for weeks. Not only that, but they're becoming more and more common. It's estimated that there have been more than 1,000 station blackouts since 2010. In 2019 alone, they've already had 230. These blackouts are unfair and they have to stop. As this committee moves forward with our look into the video marketplace, I'm going to be laser focused on stopping these blackouts. But that's not the only issue we need to examine within the video ecosystem. As Congress moves forward with hearings like this, the FCC is also engaged on these important issues. The FCC is taking steps to crack down on bogus junk fees that so often cause sticker shock and inflated bills. The proceeding would require video distributors to provide the all-in price clearly and prominently in their ads and on subscriber bills. Consumers deserve accurate information to make informed decisions, and I hope the FCC can strike the right balance. And it would be an incomplete discussion if we didn't explore the incredibly challenging headwinds our valued local news partners are facing. From election information to public safety alerts to local high school sports, Americans rely on these trusted sources of information. I've seen it firsthand, but I'm excited that Mr. Curtis LeGeyt will be describing a perfect example of local news in KCRA in Sacramento. KCRA's award-winning journalism is an indispensable part of our region's civic fabric, and during wildfires, they provide a lifeline to every resident who needs it. As we move forward with these discussions, it's the needs of the locals that I'll be fighting for, because communities like Sacramento's all over the country depend on it. With that, I appreciate today's witnesses for appearing before us and look forward to this important discussion. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, the chair of the full committee, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Latta, and all our witnesses. Today's video marketplace is evolving rapidly. Americans have more choices than ever on how, when, and where they watch content, as well as what content they watch. We've seen a profound shift in people's viewing habits, especially as streaming services have become more available and reliable. For decades, the only options available were over-the-air television and cable services, where people could watch live TV at a scheduled time on television. Now, streaming platforms allow people to watch whatever they want, whenever they want, whether that's on a TV or on the go using a phone, computer, tablet, or any device that has access to the internet. Streaming platforms have reshaped our entertainment habits, made our lives more convenient, and diversified the content available. This transformation also introduced complex challenges for the entire media industry. Cable and satellite operators continue to lose a record number of subscribers. Streaming platforms spend billions of dollars on content in a market that's flooded with competition. People have experienced major blackouts on cable networks across the country due to a failure by providers and broadcasters to reach carriage agreements, including in my district, where just this past weekend, constituents were prevented from watching local news and the Seahawks. They lost. And Hollywood is shut down as actors and writers' strike carries on. In 1992, Congress passed the Cable Act, a landmark piece of legislation that injected much-needed competition and consumer protection to a monopolistic cable and satellite TV industry. As discussed, the industry has changed drastically since then. The internet has created unlimited possibility for innovation, which we've seen with the advent of streaming services. This shift has created a new environment that the Cable Act was never designed for. After nearly 30 years, it's time for us to re-examine the law, to once again ensure that innovation and competition are encouraged. Now, some have called to simply expand the law to cover the streaming industry, rather than reevaluate it and bring it into the 21st century. This approach would be irresponsible and could potentially kill the flourishing streaming industry, locking both online platforms and traditional providers into outdated laws. Under the Obama administration, the Federal Communications Commission began a process to expand these legacy rules relating to multi-channel video programming distributors, or MVPDs, to new internet-based streaming providers. Thankfully, this effort was never finalized. Recently, however, there's been calls for the FCC to reopen that proceeding. And this is an effort I do not support, which is why earlier this year, Chairman Latta and I sent a letter to FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel cautioning the FCC from refreshing the record. We reminded the Chairwoman that the FCC does not have the legal authority to regulate streaming services. The FCC and Congress should not be in the business of applying decade-old laws to modern innovative technology, especially when much of that technology and the services it provides didn't even exist at the time that the law was written. Congress also must be mindful of the crucial role that local broadcast plays in the media industry. Local broadcasters have long been pillars of our communities, providing vital information for millions of Americans and a platform for a diversity of voices to be heard. And rural communities, in particular, rely on services provided by local broadcasting, especially when they only have limited or no access to high-speed broadband and streaming services. Local news fosters a sense of local identity, connecting people through regional programming that reflects the unique perspectives and traditions of their communities. During emergencies, local broadcasters provide important safety information to public and first responders. It's closer to the people, telling the stories and sharing the perspectives that the national news doesn't cover and sometimes ignores. As the industry changes, we must be sure that the local broadcast is preserved. Today's hearing will provide expert insight into the evolution of this market, as well as steps Congress can take to ensure outdated regulations do not hinder innovation and competition. I look forward to the discussion today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here today to discuss the ever-changing video marketplace, a marketplace that has been experiencing an ongoing transformation in recent years. These changes are dramatically impacting consumers' options and the prices they pay to view the programs and content that they want. It's hard to believe, but there was a time when a discussion of video programming brought to mind a family gathered around a boxy television with rabbit ears that on a good day could get all three major television networks. But today, there are a lot more options, and we can now scroll through endless channels. We get through either a cable or satellite service or through subscription services, access through the internet. And while the delivery mechanisms differ, at its heart, it's really all the same. It's us watching a video screen, consuming news, sports, art, and entertainment. And judging by recent surveys, we do a lot of it. In 2022, American adults spent more than 6 hours a day watching video on over-the-air broadcasting, cable, satellite TV, streaming services, and social media sites. In some ways, there's never been a better time to be a consumer of this video content. Numerous options mean competition, lower prices, and more awareness of what consumers want. Distributors are buying unprecedented amounts of content, generating more opportunities for content creators who are women and people of color, and creating more diversity and choice for consumers. And new competitive streaming services have offered consumers the promise of saving money by only paying for the content that they want. But while the industry remains robust and consumers have largely benefited, new players in the market, disruptive technology, changing business models, and outpaced statutes have dramatically altered revenue streams. And all of these forces have created a precarious moment in which it isn't entirely clear what the future may hold. Unfortunately, we're already beginning to see market consolidation, rising prices, junk fees, and disappearing content. And consumers are beginning to experience subscription fatigue as they spend upwards of $100 a month on multiple services to get access to all of the content they want to watch. Television blackouts are rampant, and content creators that are finally getting a chance to tell their stories are finding that new gatekeepers and take-it-or-leave-it deals are impacting their ability to make a living. Moreover, we can't forget that the backbone of all of this is broadband internet access. Unlike our old cable bundles or free over-the-air broadcasting, access to these new online video services requires a separate subscription to high-quality, reliable broadband. Unfortunately, the digital divide persists, and whether due to affordability or availability, a broadband subscription often remains out of reach for many families. And that's why programs that Democrats have championed, like the Affordable Connectivity Program and the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, are so important. They offer so much promise to truly unlock these innovative video services for people across the country who simply did not have access to high-speed internet, either because they could not afford it or simply it was not available where they live. And we should all keep this in mind as we discuss the positive impact these programs are making on American families around the nation. We're also challenged in the shifting video marketplace by a changing information landscape. Americans still, by and large, depend on broadcasters and cable for trusted local news, safe children's programming, live events, and emergency information. And newer online streaming services still rely on traditional channels to offer this important content to consumers. What's more, as consumers increasingly turn to social media and online platforms that host user-generated content, we've seen a dramatic uptick in misinformation, disinformation, and content harmful to children. And this troubling content blurs the lines between fact and fiction, erodes consumer trust, and jeopardizes our democracy, in my opinion. So the evolving video marketplace is complex, and amidst this uncertainty, it's more important than ever to put consumers first and make sure they're not being ripped off by these companies because of high prices and junk fees. My focus will remain on consumers and the timeless principles of competition, localism, and diversity in the Communications Act. And while our statutes and regulations have clearly not kept pace as the media landscape has changed, the solution is not to throw it all out, give up any oversight, and abandon consumers. Instead, we must remember why these statutes and regulations were enacted in the first place, and only then can we decide how best to carry these values forward on behalf of American consumers. So I look forward to the discussion today. I think it's an important hearing. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses for today. Mr. Curtis LeGeyt, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Broadcasters. Mr. Grant Spellmeyer, President and Chief Executive Officer, ACA Connects Americans Communications Association. Mr. David Gandler, Co-Founder and Chief Executive Officer of FuboTV, Inc., and Mr. Jonathan Schwantes, the Senior Policy Counsel for Consumer Reports. And I want to thank you again for all being with us. I want to also take a quick, so you all know, to understand the lights, and hope that it's out there on the table today, but your timer light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining and will turn red when your time has expired. And just a quick note of personal privilege, we do have the former chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee with us today, and also the former subcommittee chair of the Communications and Technology. I think that's might be more important, but Greg Walden's with us today. So, Mr. Chairman, welcome back. Mr. LeGeyt, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairs Rogers and Latta, Ranking Members Pallone and Matsui, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Curtis LeGeyt, and I am the President and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters. I'm proud to testify today on behalf of our thousands of local television and radio station members who serve your constituents across the country. In today's media landscape, television and radio broadcasters' value proposition stands alone. We are the most trusted, we are the most local, we offer the most in-demand sports and entertainment programming, and we are freely available to any viewer and listener who wants to access our stations over the air. For those reasons, we remain the most popular. More than 181 million adults watch broadcast TV each month, and more than 227 million listeners tune into broadcast radio each week. Most importantly, we are lifelines in times of emergency when internet and cell networks fail. Consider the wildfires that recently ravaged the island of Maui, destroying homes, lives, and businesses, and forcing thousands of people to evacuate. For days, there was no power, no water, and no internet service. Fiber lines and cell towers burned to the ground, but broadcasting remained one of the few dependable sources of communication, providing round-the-clock updates on the fires, emergency supplies, and shelter that kept people safe. And tragically, this is not unique. Whether it's tornadoes in Ohio or flooding in California, broadcasters are there. Yet broadcasters' investment in this service, all freely available to the public, does not exist in a vacuum. We compete in a fierce media landscape that's been dramatically reshaped by changes in technology and an avalanche of content options. Today, we compete for audience, advertising dollars, and content rights with cable, satellite, podcasts, digital platforms, and most significantly, big tech. Yet, despite these industry changes, broadcasters remain uniquely subject to rules governing our scale and scope from a bygone era. Unlike TV broadcasters, no rule restricts YouTube or TikTok's audience reach to 39% of U.S. households. Unlike radio broadcasters, no rule limits SiriusXM to offering only 5 channels in one local market. And our competitors have no obligations or incentive to provide the local news, weather, sports, public affairs, or emergency information that our audiences rely on. We offer a public service that our competitors do not replicate. Yet we do all this while competing with one arm tied behind our backs. To that end, more must be done to ensure fair competition and continued consumer access to our essential service. This committee should urge the FCC to immediately take 4 actions. First, the FCC should complete its 2018 quadrennial review and modernize its broadcast ownership rules to account for the rise and increasing dominance of digital media. Second, the FCC should refresh the record in its virtual MVPD proceeding to ensure it reflects the impact of streaming on viewer access to local stations. Third, the FCC should create a more transparent, fair, and predictable process to review broadcast transactions. And finally, the FCC should continue supporting the rollout of NextGen TV. These are 4 actions the FCC can take today. Additionally, this committee should focus its legislative efforts on 2 bills: the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act, which will ensure continued access to AM radio as a safety standard in automobiles, and legislation to reinstate the Diversity Tax Certificate Program, which will help broadcasters better reflect the diversity of the communities we serve. In conclusion, America's broadcasters are extremely proud of our service to your constituents. But importantly, we must acknowledge that our role is not accidental. It is a shared success between our industry and a legal framework that was created and refined by generations of this committee. While some on the witness panel may criticize elements of it, our blend of local and national programming that is uniquely tailored to every community across the country is one of the true success stories in a century of telecommunications law. As a result, our free and local broadcast system remains the envy of the world. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and Mr. Spellmeyer, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on these very timely issues. Aside from Congressman Pallone, no member of this committee was in Congress 31 years ago when it enacted the 1992 Cable Act. Looking back, no one could have accurately predicted the tremendous changes that would follow from that law. The law resulted in content providers gaining disproportionate leverage over smaller cable providers and their subscribers. ACA Connects was formed in 1993 after passage to give small and rural cable operators a seat at the table in Washington. Since then, ACA has been engaged on every major legislative and regulatory decision affecting the video marketplace. We appreciate the seat at this table today. Fast forward to 2023, we have over 500 members who together serve all 50 states. 30 years ago, cable television was my members' core business. By 2019, that was no longer true. The marketplace had evolved so dramatically that we changed our name from the American Cable Association to America's Communications Association, ACA Connects, to emphasize our members' growing focus on broadband delivery platforms. The shift away from video programming is fundamentally driven by the ever-rising cost of programming, especially sports content. You need look no further than Exhibits A and B to my testimony, written testimony, to understand the history of the price increases that we've experienced. But don't let me leave you with the impression that there is no good news, however. Consumers have access to tons of content. ACA Connects members are delivering that content to their consumers over world-class broadband infrastructure that empowers consumer choice. If we as a country are to collectively seize this moment for the benefit of consumers, we must ensure that the rules operate fairly and rationally without anyone having the ability to exert undue leverage. Otherwise, we face a reckoning. Looking forward, there are three main issues that are worth your attention here in Congress today. First, just as we have seen the disruption to local newspapers and other media driven by changing habits and technologies, the video business has changed forever. I can tell you that some of my members, both large and small, have exited the video business already. I can tell you that all of them are seriously considering the possibility of doing that in the future. Since cable customers have largely funded the content explosion, the fallout of this coming change is going to be profound for everyone, including providers, programmers, and local broadcasters. How Congress chooses to impact the pace of change is of paramount importance to everyone. Second, a constant theme is that market size and market power casts a massive influence over innovation and pricing. We encourage you to look at existing programs, rules, and laws with an eye towards trying to make sure that no player can assert undue leverage, resulting in harm to competition or consumers. The same is true for many telecom policies under consideration before this committee. Take net neutrality, for example. All the evidence points to a healthy and functioning dynamic marketplace where broadband providers make it possible for their subscribers to choose content sources. I cannot leave this table today without urging you to consider the risks of revisiting Title II rate regulation. If anything, just as we have seen in the video marketplace, policymakers need to consider the impact on smaller providers who lack leverage over online giants. Failure to do so could destabilize the ecosystem, especially in the rural markets we serve. Third and finally, while the transition to internet-delivered services and content is well underway, many consumers today are still impacted every day by factors such as the rates, terms, and conditions for linear programming. The antiquated retransmission consent framework continues to leave customers suffering under a regime of inflated prices, blackouts, and without the ability to choose content packages that best suit their needs. We must fix it and avoid future mistakes. We hope that you will keep these dynamics in mind and the lessons of history in mind as we tackle these issues going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Mr. Gandler, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Matsui, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is David Gandler, and I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of Fubo. I've been in the media industry for nearly 25 years in various roles, including at local broadcast and cable TV companies in both the general and Hispanic markets. I co-founded Fubo in 2015 for 2 reasons. I wanted to help consumers access content that was difficult for them to find, and 2, I believed that the media landscape was transitioning to streaming, and so it did. Today, consumers have freedom when deciding how to access content. With the rise of streaming, the video content marketplace has become increasingly diverse and competitive. From traditional cable to satellite to a variety of streaming services, accessing news, entertainment, and sports content is easier than ever, and prices are very competitive. Cable, fiber, and satellite television companies like Comcast and DirecTV continue to offer content to consumers. However, with streaming services, consumers can access content on their computers, televisions, and mobile devices. These streaming services provide content in various formats. Services like Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, or Netflix allow consumers to stream selections from a library of content. These services typically offer content on demand, pre-recorded video for users to watch at their leisure with limited or no live content. Services like Fubo, YouTube TV, and Hulu Plus Live TV are similar to traditional cable, satellite, and fiber companies in the content that they offer. But they are very different in every other aspect. These services aggregate hundreds of broadcast television stations, but deliver them to consumers over the internet. They offer both live and video on-demand content. Notably, the live TV content streamed from such providers includes access to almost every local station in America. For example, Fubo subscribers can stream approximately 99% of local stations across the country. Further, live TV streamers like Fubo can be a cheaper consumer alternative. We do not require and therefore do not charge consumers for cable or satellite boxes. Also, consumers do not have to agree to long-term contracts, as they may be required to do with cable. All of these benefits for consumers, including the broad optionality and accessibility of local content, are possible because companies like Fubo do not face regulation that undermine our ability to prioritize consumer preferences and to innovate. Applying decades-old regulations to streaming platforms is the epitome of a solution in search of a problem. Unfortunately, large station groups are pushing the FCC for rule changes that would ultimately increase costs for consumers. These groups are pushing to force streaming platforms to negotiate with them directly for content that they do not own. They seek to revive a long-dormant proceeding that provoked an overwhelmingly negative response during a public consultation. Commenters pointed to the potential harm to viewers, content creators, and local news providers. The protracted Nexstar and DirecTV dispute is a recent example. Nexstar has pulled its content from DirecTV for several months now. Blackouts such as this cause massive disruption for consumers who are not able to watch the must-have programming, including pro football games like this past weekend. Consumers undoubtedly benefit from our subscription model. Our subscribers receive a Fubo channel plan that's right for them, with applicable local news, weather, and sports content, as well as national networks. However, it would simply not be possible for us to provide this content to consumers if regulations required that we negotiate with each local station. The time and people necessary to complete such negotiations would allow us only to focus on major media markets, leaving many local communities behind. This would be a profoundly detrimental change to the current system where virtually anyone in the United States with broadband access can sign up for Fubo and access their local content. Also, it's highly unlikely that Fubo and other streaming companies will be treated fairly in any such negotiations, and ultimately, again, the consumer will be adversely impacted. We know consumers want the technological innovation, content selection, and competition created by the current system because we see that in the rate of customers canceling their traditional pay TV services, otherwise known as cord cutting, has continued to accelerate in the United States. Thank you for the opportunity to appear at this hearing today, and I am, of course, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Schwantes, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Matsui, and members of the subcommittee. And thank you for inviting me to testify on the current state of the video marketplace. My name is John Schwantes, and I'm a senior policy counsel at Consumer Reports. Today, we will no doubt hear that the video marketplace has been dramatically disrupted, with the pace of change accelerating in just the past 2 or 3 years. On this point, many of us will agree. Traditional cable and satellite TV companies have lost millions of customers, specifically more than 25 million in just the past 5 years. On the other hand, streaming services, a novelty a decade ago, have signed up millions of subscribers. Netflix alone counts 75.5 million U.S. subscribers. And today, some streaming services provide live television, equivalent to what a traditional cable company offers. Importantly, free over-the-air local broadcasting still exists, but many younger consumers have no memory that television once meant receiving 3 or 4 local broadcast channels with an antenna just 40 or 50 years ago. Speaking for myself, I do remember. To put this in perspective, last year in July, for the very first time, as Chairman Lata pointed out, streaming services drew more viewers than cable TV. They snagged a nearly 35% share of total TV consumption in the country. Streaming stretched its lead to nearly 39% this past summer. So what's going on here? First, it's important to understand that how consumers view content is as important as how they receive content. With the introduction of the iPhone and other smartphones in 2007, the rapid proliferation of screens began, allowing consumers to watch video content whenever they wanted, wherever they wanted. But none of these changes would have been possible without the availability of an affordable, fast, and reliable broadband connection, which is necessary to stream video. Aided with the arrival of mobile screens and sufficient computing power, the internet was set to revolutionize the video marketplace, much like it had the newspaper and music industries earlier in the decade. These changes created a market shift away from watching television at a set time, so-called linear programming, and empowered consumers to watch content on their own schedule. This democratization of viewer choice started to chip away at the long dominant business model of cable television, significantly altered consumer behavior, and fueled the changes we will be discussing here today. On balance, these changes have benefited consumers in numerous ways. Competition and more consumer choice for video programming is a good thing, and there are more choices for video content and more ways to access that content than ever before. Consumer behavior bears this out. According to a nationally representative consumer reports survey conducted earlier this year, roughly half of American households say they subscribe to 4 or more streaming services, and almost 1 in 10 subscribe to 9 or more. Furthermore, most streaming applications allow consumers to easily cancel any time during a given month, meaning consumers are only obligated to pay for 1 month, in which they can view as much content as they like and during that time and then cancel. As for the equipment required for video streaming, all a consumer needs is a device that can either host streaming applications like a smartphone or many TVs sold today, or a device that connects to a TV to host these applications, many of which are less than $50. This is a stark departure from having to rent a set-top box from a cable or satellite company. But it's not all good news. Subscribing to multiple streaming platforms can also be expensive. In this respect, the many choices offered by streaming require consumers to be more conscious of their purchasing decisions in real time and cognizant of how much they are spending across the many streaming apps they are subscribing to each month. Moreover, many streaming services have raised their prices recently. Of course, price increases are nothing new for cable TV subscribers. But perhaps the biggest harm facing consumers in the video marketplace is the prevalence of blackouts, which happen when an agreement isn't reached between a content provider and a video distributor. Blackouts are both disturbing and anti-consumer, with an estimated 1,000 of them having occurred since 2010. To be crystal clear, these disputes are all about money and universally harm consumers. The recent dispute between Disney and Charter serves as Exhibit A for understanding this problem. Because 2 multi-billion-dollar companies could not come to an agreement on a price for carrying Disney's content, 15 million Charter Spectrum cable subscribers were denied ABC, ESPN, and other channels owned by Disney for more than a week. The problem of blackouts and other challenges facing the video marketplace can and should be addressed by Congress in a way that would better benefit consumers. Policymakers would be wise to assess what is working, what is not, what we value in a healthy video marketplace, and then act to level the playing field for all video providers in a way to best serve consumers. I outlined some of these ideas in my written testimony and would be happy to discuss them further. With that, I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. Again, we appreciate all of our witnesses for being with us today, and at this time, we will now begin the questionings from the members of the committee. And the chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. LeGeyt, Mr. Spellmeyer, and Mr. Gandler, if I could ask if you could make maybe just a brief statement or answer on this for about 30 seconds each. The media marketplace has experienced significant changes since the passage of the Cable Act of 1992. Local broadcast TV and cable are required to operate in a regulated environment while now competing against streaming services which remain unregulated. If these laws don't change in the next 2 to 5 years, looking over the horizon, what's the outlook for your industry?
Thank you for the question. The outlook for the industry isn't a positive one. Broadcasters are competing with these unregulated streaming services for audience, advertising dollars, and content rights. And as big tech especially has thrown its weight into this space, advertising dollars are being gobbled up in local markets. Consumers are cutting the cord for a litany of reasons, but reducing retransmission consent fees from traditional pay TV outlets, and all of that means less revenue for local stations to put into local news and information, absent some ownership reforms and absent the FCC looking at the impact of the virtual MVPDs on this marketplace.
Thank you. Ms. Spellmeyer?
So from my member's perspective, I think I've outlined it pretty well in my written and my oral testimony. If something doesn't change in the next few years, we do face a real reckoning for consumers and for the industry. As I said, my members saw this coming, have started to migrate away from a primary focus on video delivery to broadband delivery. And that broadband delivery has opened up the ability for competition, both for broadband service and the over-the-top services that are flourishing.
Thank you. Mr. Gandler?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to state that I certainly empathize with all of my colleagues here. I worked at a local television station in the great state of Texas in San Antonio, DMA number 7, Hispanic, DMA number 35, general market. And so I understand the problem, but if you look at Fubo, for instance, with respect to retrans fees, our sub base has been growing by between 20 and 40% per year. So the amount of money that we're generating on retrans is growing quite rapidly. At the same time, as being one of the smallest players in the country, we're also paying a pretty significant escalator over the last, call it 6 or 7 years. So when you couple the massive growth rate with the escalators that we're paying and the amount of the number of stations that we carry, which right now is over 800 plus, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, over 99% coverage across the United States with one blackout that happened earlier this year, I think we've done a pretty good job driving revenue. The last thing I'll say as it relates to local news, it's very important to identify the fact that a lot of the programming that we're talking about here is owned by national broadcasters. And so the local news component is quite different and is available on tens of millions, almost 100 million plus devices at this point in time, where you can access any of the news channels across any of the major sticks or connected TVs. So I think from that perspective, we've done a really good job ensuring that we have viewpoint diversity and have access to as many channels as possible across the United States.
Thank you. Mr. LeGeyt, broadcast stations are currently prohibited from reaching more than 39% of U.S. households, while streaming services can reach any household with a broadband connection. Do the current laws and regulations, such as those on media ownership, provide an equitable playing field for the media marketplace today?
No, they absolutely don't. We've seen the tremendous disruption posed by the big tech companies on the advertising marketplace. The newspapers are the most prolific example of that. The tremendous dominance in the advertising marketplace of big tech has effectively destroyed the newspaper industry. As a result, local broadcasters are filling that void. More than 50% of newsroom staffing in the country is happening in local broadcast stations. And our constraint on further investment in those newsrooms is only inhibited by our ability to offer advertisers more scale and receive greater revenue that we can put into that reinvestment.
Thank you. Ms. Spellmeyer, in my about last 15 seconds here, with the increasing trend toward cord cutting, how is your industry addressing the changing demands of consumers who seek more flexibility and choice in their content consumption?
It's a tough one, Mr. Chairman, in 7 seconds, but I would say that we are focusing on trying to fix the trap that we find ourselves in. We are squeezed by prices for programming and content that continues to rise, and we have no alternative other than to pass it along, go out of business, or I've lost my third one. I apologize. It's pass it along, it's go out of business, or it's black them out, and nobody wants blackouts. So My apologies.
Well, thank you very much, and my time has expired, and I will submit my final questions for our witnesses to answer. And at this time, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're on the heels of one of the largest television blackouts in recent memory between Disney and Charter. Mr. Schwantes, you laid out your argument about the regulatory explanations for blackouts in your testimony, but we also know there are other factors at play. Mr. Schwantes, do you believe changing market dynamics have a role to play in the increasingly regular television blackouts, and if so, how?
The short answer is yes. I think we've seen an increase in blackouts for some of the reasons some of the other witnesses have pointed out. I mean, local broadcasters have lost advertising to big tech. That is well documented. But a regulatory structure exists in the 92 Cable Act. We'll hear a lot about it today, called retransmission consent, where cable companies are obligated to carry these local channels. So there's a lot of leverage with the broadcasters to extract, and I don't blame them, as much as they can out of cable companies to put them on the air. Are they increasing for that reason because they need more money? Maybe. But I do know that as Grant just pointed out, these fees, these increased retransmission consent fees are passed on to consumers. Now, we will quibble with how they are passed on in the form of junk fees called the broadcast TV fee, which in some markets are more than $20 a month, and they're not in the advertised price.
Sure.
And that's killing consumers. But I would say between the two, blackouts are even worse.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LeGeyt, I'm so thrilled to see your testimony describes the many accomplishments, particularly of KCRA in Sacramento. As a longtime viewer myself, I think the pioneering local journalism they're doing on behalf of the Sacramento region sets a national standard for excellence and public service. During wildfires, elections, and everything in between, they're working hard to keep Sacramento informed. Mr. LeGeyt, we're all excited about the many video options consumers have today, but can you talk about the role free, local, over-the-air television and radio stations play in promoting equitable access to information?
Thank you for the question. Local broadcasting is unique because we are freely available to every consumer who wants to access us over the air. I take issue with the term that's been thrown around thus far in this hearing, a blackout, because a local broadcast station never goes off the air. It may be that a local broadcast station can't reach an agreement with a provider that wants to repackage our programming and sell it in a bundle to consumers, but the local station is never off the air. And so in times of emergency, when cell networks fail, we are always there providing that service to local communities. And it's important to know that these impasses are last resorts, right? 99% of the time, these contractual carriage negotiations are concluded successfully without disruption. But when they are, we need to be there however our consumers are accessing us, because we're an antidote to the type of misinformation that's happening online.
Okay. Now, what about when natural disasters have compromised internet-based communications? What function do over-the-air services play?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head, Congresswoman, which is that we are on the air. That is when local broadcasters, both television and radio, are doing our best work. And what's unique is we're not just there reporting during the natural disaster, ensuring that our viewers and listeners have access to safety, the information they need, but we're also there in communities with the recovery from these natural disasters. We are boots on the ground ensuring that these communities can rebuild.
Certainly. Earlier this year, the FCC announced a proposal to require price transparency from video distributors. This would help prevent sticker shock and give consumers better information about the true cost of a video service. Consumers deserve more transparency, and this is a step in the right direction. Mr. Schwantes, can you describe how these fees are obscured from consumers and advertising materials? And I get a warning sign already here.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman. I'm happy to. There's a long history in telecom of itemizing fees. Some of those are the obvious ones like taxes and government fees, like a universal service fund fee, things of that nature. Going back to our favorite law of the day, the 92 Cable Act, also allowed cable companies the discretion. It did not mandate, but they had the ability to also itemize their own fees, what we call it, Consumer Reports, company-imposed fees. It's very popular now to call them junk fees, but let's keep it civil. And that's where we're seeing a lot of these fees. They're not in the advertised price, Congresswoman. We looked at 1,000 bills back in 2018, and we found that the company-imposed fees, so broadcast TV fee, regional sports fee, HD technology fee, you name it, there's a name for all of them, contributed 24% of the advertised price, that much, like a 24% surcharge, totaling $37 a month. I would hazard a guess it's much more expensive today because those fees have only gone up. And that's where they're hidden. They're hidden in the fine print.
Okay, well, my time has run out. I'll submit other questions, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, the chair of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. We share concerns, Mr. LeGeyt, we share concerns about the FCC's decision to issue a hearing designation order for the Standard General and Tegna merger. This decision killed the creation of the nation's largest minority-owned, women-led broadcast company in U.S. history and was not even brought to the commission level for a vote. I'm concerned that if the FCC continues down this path, they will silence voices and hurt the future of local broadcast. What would that mean for the future of the broadcast industry as it relates to mergers, and what message did this action by the FCC send to local broadcasters?
Thank you for the question and for your attention to this issue. You know, I'm very, very focused on incenting investment into the local broadcast industry. I think every one of us, if we were to talk about the local stations in your district, would say, I want more of the local news and local programming that those stations are offering, and that's only going to happen if we have investment in this industry. Uncertainty at the FCC as to whether a transaction, a proposed transaction, is going to get an up or down vote, and that up or down vote is going to happen in a timely fashion, is absolutely paramount to ensuring that would-be investors will come into broadcasting. So I share your concern. I worry that it's having a chilling effect. We haven't seen those effects yet, but it is very much top of mind for the local broadcast industry.
As a follow-up, I don't know, you don't want to call them blackouts. What do you want to call them? Programming not available?
We'll call them impasses.
Impasses. Okay, when we reach these impasses and people do not have access, and when they're not available, certainly we're seeing more of that, it seems. Yeah. Even you're hearing it today, certain broadcast stations on cable programming. This weekend it was local Spokane station where we did not have access to important news updates, and as I mentioned, the Seahawks football game on Sunday. So wanted to ask you and Mr. Spellmeyer if you would just walk us through the retransmission consent negotiation process from broadcast and cable perspective, respectively, and what's the biggest challenges in reaching a deal?
Yeah, I think it's important to underscore that in the vast majority of these negotiations, they are resolved without any impact on viewers. And it is a worst-case scenario for all parties if a viewer is impacted, because obviously we are in the business of reaching viewers. But look, we've talked about all the competition in the marketplace, and it is absolutely paramount that local broadcasters have the ability to reinvest in local programming. Our retransmission consent revenues are a big part of that. You know, at times this is cast as behemoths against small guys, one side or the other. Certainly, Mr. Spellmeyer, I have a lot of sympathy for his smaller members, but your local Fox station is a great example. It is oftentimes also small broadcasters going up against a large cable provider. So these things are not easy, but the negotiations ensure that local broadcasters can reinvest in their programming.
So from my members' perspective, there's an absolute need to fix this going forward. It's a product of the law that allows these blackouts to come into place. Mr. LeGeyt is correct that the vast majority of our negotiations are resolved without a blackout, and that's because my members roll over and accept the prices demanded by the broadcasters. It's what drives the fees that you see in my testimony. And we really can't continue to do this and hope to have my members continue to serve as video providers. And the more important thing, I don't want this to be a retrans hearing. This shouldn't be all about retrans. There's so many issues that we're stuck with it now, and I'd love to have Congress fix it.
Okay.
But we've got regulatory overhang that we need to
Thank you.
deal
I want to
with.
get one more question, Mr. Gandler, because Fubo is a streaming platform offering TV, sports, and local broadcast content. And would you just speak briefly to how that has worked with the broadcasters to carry that local content on your?
Yes, thank you. We carry over 800-plus local TV stations. It makes our negotiation with the broadcasters very easy. We've been ensuring that we don't go into blackout. But I will read you one quote from Mr. Tom Carter, who is the former president and chief operating officer of Nexstar. And this is as of March 7th. We are in a dispute with CBS right now over the Fubo situation, Tom Carter said during a Morgan Stanley-hosted investor conference. But keep in mind that virtual MVPDs contribute less than 10% of our distribution revenue, and our distribution revenue is about half of our total revenue. And Fubo is the smallest virtual MVPD we deal with. So we're talking about a relatively minor amount of money, quite honestly, to both us and CBS. So it's kind of easy to pick Fubo as a fight to have. So my point here is that it's very difficult to negotiate with local broadcasters because they don't own the Seahawks content. That is owned by the broadcaster, and the retrans fees that are paid, they're quite significant, number one. Number two, if you look at the history of these local station groups, they basically have been using retrans to invest outside of local programming. If you note, Nexstar has acquired the CW network, which is not about local programming. It's about syndicated content. So, I don't think it really is a last resort, as you can see from this quote. So we're very happy with the current way the model works. And, we've been very transparent with consumers. We don't have junk fees. We do have an RSN fee because we're a sports-first platform. But I think it works well because people get a free trial, which you don't get in cable. Then we send out a reminder to customers a week before, and so
Thank
this
you.
has been working quite well.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida's 9th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Central Florida, we love our sports and the options to view them, which is why we're all very relieved when we saw Disney and ESPN and Charter Communications bring that deal in for a landing. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We also value both local content and national content. In Central Florida, we're the 7th largest media market, and so we want to hear stories about Central Floridians. It's important for our citizenry to be educated on issues happening among their local governments, state and federal, weather, local sports, food, traffic, the arts, all absolutely critical things. And as we see this shifting landscape, broadcast, cable, satellite, social media, streaming, and amidst all this, we see shifting revenues, right? And, these are mostly private sector deals that will evolve. But there are some values that are important for my community. Local content, access, diversity, and affordability, which is why we were big supporters of the ACP, which we already heard our ranking member talk about. And while these are primarily private sector arm's length negotiations, we have a duty to oversee, which is why we're here today, and when necessary, legislate when these public values are threatened, which is why I was excited to see this deal coming for a landing without us having to get involved. A transformative multi-year agreement. Majority of Disney networks and stations will be available to Spectrum's video customers. We even see some sharing between each of their online offerings as well. So first for Mr. LeGeyt, what do you think this deal means for the future of other deals between local and national providers and cable offerings?
Well, I certainly think the deal underscores all of the transformation that we are talking about here. But as it relates to local broadcasting, I think what it ensures and what it demonstrates is that the system does continue to work. These were tough negotiations, but at the end of the day, the local broadcast station was always available throughout the dispute, free over the air to those viewers, and the parties came to a quick resolution. But there is a lot of disruption here, and I think some of the issues that were ultimately negotiated to an agreement between Disney and Charter demonstrate how much disruption really there is in this landscape posed by the streaming services, and how important it is for local broadcasters that we are going to be accessible on those streaming services.
Mr. Spellmeyer, it'd be great to get your opinion on this.
Thank you, sir. So the settlement, as I understand it, is a promising development for the industry, holding out the possibility that new and innovative approaches can be implemented. But that said, these are private transactions, but it's about market power. Please don't forget about market power. Charter and Disney are two relatively equally weighted players in a very big with big pockets. And when it comes to the rest of us in the cable industry, we don't have that kind of balance. It is a much different transaction. There's a lot of really big players in this industry. None of them are at the table here today. You can call the broadcasters big. They're the biggest of the people at the table, but the really big people are not here.
Well, you'd be happy. I was talking to my local broadcasters last night, so you all are definitely at the table. It'd be great to hear from Mr. Schwantes and Mr. Gandler. You know, streaming has been a super fast force, and we've seen it reduce costs, but I'm also concerned about content creation. Where do you think the balance lies ahead as we're looking at things like the SAG-AFTRA strike and of this balance between cost and content creation? Mr. Gandler and then Mr. Schwantes.
Thank you. You know, this isn't a real issue that we have to deal with directly. We acquire our content the same way that the large cable companies do through licensing relationships with Disney, NBC Universal, and others. So personally, you know, it's a shame that this is happening, but we are going through a very disruptive time, but I think the market forces have been working quite well to ensure that things go on. And just to mention one quick thing on the Charter situation, you know, as the dispute unfolded, Charter had offered all its customers access and promotional pricing to go to Fubo. And Disney did the same, offering customers to go to Hulu Live to ensure that everyone had access at least over the weekend.
My time's expired, so.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida's 12th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Mr. Spellmeyer, with costs for cable companies to acquire content rising and pressure to have even more content than competitors, is there less money available for new entrants and independent linear channels? Essentially, how do these smaller players compete? And what does this mean for diversity of content?
It does mean that it's more difficult to find the resources to add independent and new startup networks. There are also capacity constraints that are on cable systems that are consumed by the dominant cable content providers who demand that, you know, not only that you carry one channel or two channels, but these 18 other channels over here. And so it does significantly impact that ability and does hurt consumers as well. There's some opportunity to go to the web and see some of those content sources there. Again, I would come back to the importance of broadband being out there. Without a competitive broadband network where you have a telephone company, a cable company, a wireless company, a cellular company, all with, and a satellite television delivery, you've got potentially 5 people in a market that can beam that content in. And that's the biggest thing that's changed in the last decade for this video marketplace.
Thank you, sir. Mr. LeGeyt, as you know, my district and my constituents were recently impacted by a Hurricane Idalia. I thank you and our local broadcasters for keeping our community safe before and during and after the storm, as a matter of fact. As we discuss today's competitive landscape, do you see the big tech companies performing any of these same protective services, sir? And I want to thank all of you for your testimony today as well, but if you could respond, I'd appreciate it.
I don't. It's local broadcasters uniquely who are on the ground, as you just put it, and I very much appreciate your acknowledgement, who are on the ground both during the storm and then after, helping the communities come together. And I don't know that I can overstate how much some of the changing landscape that we're talking about here is going to impact that localism. As Mr. Spellmeyer just put it, his smaller cable companies are either exiting the business or considering exiting the business. Mr. Gandler told us that Fubo is getting into the business because they see audiences flocking to streaming. And we know that if we had had this hearing 10 years ago, YouTube TV didn't even exist. Now it's the 5th largest linear pay TV provider in the country. So the FCC needs to really look at whether local broadcasters are going to be able to provide that type of service after a storm, reach their viewers in a world in which streaming continues to proliferate. This is something that the expert agency needs to provide a basis for examining.
I'll tell you what, I want to put a plug in for Dennis Phillips, who's a local broadcaster, weatherman in our area, ABC Action News. His son was in Tallahassee, Florida State University. My son was at the University of Florida, but he was giving us personal advice on what to do. And the parents were very concerned because it was scheduled, the hurricane was actually scheduled to hit Tallahassee, and the parents were very concerned. But he put them at ease, and that's a great thing. It really is. So I have one more question. I don't know. Yeah, I have a little more time. Mr. Spellmeyer, over the years, as the marketplace has changed and expanded, Congress has tried to find ways to support small market participants' ability to compete. This includes allowing the small MVPDs to collaborate for retransmission consent agreements. Since Congress has allowed this collaboration in 2019, have these MVPDs seen the success they were hoping for, and what are the existing barriers for these businesses, sir?
Thank you to Congress for the work that they did in 2019 in Stellar in allowing my members to work through NCTC, our buying cooperative, to try to collectively negotiate this stuff. The last retrans cycle happened several months after the passage of the legislation, so it was really brand new in the first cycle. We're about to go through another cycle. And I think this cycle will be the one that really allows us to judge how effective it's been. It's helped, but obviously look at the pricing. It hasn't slowed down in terms of its increases. We all want local broadcasters to succeed. Many of my members serve only a county or 2 counties. They're there. They go to the grocery store on the weekend, just like members of Congress do. We want that local coverage, and we want to be there to help, and we try to use community access channels and things like that to promote it. We're all in this together, but we got to reverse some of the fundamental structural problems that were created by the passage of this law and the change in technology.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yield back, Mr.
The gentleman yields back. Before we go to our next member, I just want to let the witnesses know that we do also have another subcommittee running right now downstairs, and so we have members coming in and out, so that's why you see members up and down and out of their chairs running down to ask their questions at this time. But at this time, I do want to recognize the gentlelady from California 16th District for 5 minutes for for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our ranking member as well for holding this very important hearing and to all of the gentlemen that are at the table, thank you for your testimony. I think if there's one thing that I would say for sure about this hearing is that we have a real problem with blackouts. And it is Congress that needs to cure that. Consumers are being hammered. It's totally unfair. It's a tool of negotiation by people that think of themselves as being innovators and entrepreneurs. What an idea. Let's just screw the consumer. You know, I mean, what is this? Congress hasn't updated the statutes that govern all of this. They're outdated laws and regulations, and they really contribute, I think, to the scourge of blackouts. Congressman Scalise and myself have introduced the Modern Television Act in the last two Congresses. We will again in this Congress, and it would reform the existing regime to prevent blackouts and allow free market contract negotiations to happen under traditional copyright law. So I think that all of our constituents are worthy of that. And I hope our, what everyone, almost to a member, has said something about these blackouts, that we can do it. We can cast a light on this and get it done. Mr. Schwantes, in your written testimony, you discuss the Modern Television Act and the need to reform the existing regime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can you describe, in your view, the effect the MTA would have and how it would benefit consumers?
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's good to see you. As you know, Consumer Reports has supported your legislation, and it's kind of, you know, I'll be succinct. It's the definition of insanity. Keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result. We think, you know, is there a silver bullet here? No. I mean, there's some strong medicine that even I wouldn't support, so let's not even talk about that. But I do like copyright. Don't judge me. I was on the Judiciary Committee for 9 years on the Senate side, so we like copyright law. It's not going to, but to be super, super clear and realistic, would not prevent blackouts. I mean, it still is a private contract negotiation. I really do like the baseball-style arbitration in the law, that where instead of going to a blackout and you miss the U.S. Open and potentially Monday Night Football, you can keep the station on for 60 days and figure it out. Again, is that perfect? I don't know, but I'm open to trying new things. The last thing I'll say, and Mr. Spellmeyer alluded to it, a lot of these deals, I'm not repping Charter, but they're going up against Disney. And Charter's big, second largest cable company in the country. But it's not just you're negotiating for ABC. You're negotiating for, you got to take all of those channels, you know, and come up with a package for that. Some observers I've seen is like, let's just make, you just have a negotiation for the local channels. And all that other cable properties, you can have that in a separate negotiation, but let's look at the local channels and do that. But I think copyright, there's a different level of incentives, and it's more akin to what the virtual world is, a copyright world. Thank you.
Mr. Spellmeyer, in your written testimony, you talk about the loopholes that allow broadcasters to purchase more than one of the top 4 stations in a local market. How do these loopholes and the resulting consolidation in local markets contribute to blackouts? First of all, do you think they do? And if so, your view on that, and how else does station consolidation negatively impact consumers?
I believe, as I've talked earlier, this is about market power. To the extent to the extent any entity is allowed to acquire and control more stations, more content, that only sets the stage for an abuse of market power. There are a number of terms that I know fly around the industry, things like sidecars, that is a discussion about how you own somebody, but you don't technically control them under FCC definitions. There's a bunch of minutia that I'm still learning. I've moved over to this job last year trying to sort through all the history of 25 years at the FCC. But I fundamentally agree with you. Congress needs to step in and fix some of this. The FCC can't do it, or if they do it, it'll just get ping-ponged around again and litigated. Congress needs to fix it. We applaud your and Mr. Scalise's legislation. You've been pushing this for, what, 4 or 5 sessions now, and I don't think the situation's gotten any better.
No.
It's deteriorating. You can see it in my charts. You can see it in the blackout statistics that were cited, and it is an important topic for this committee to continue to address.
And to the witnesses that I haven't asked questions here, you'll be receiving mine in written form. Appreciate all of your testimony. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan's 5th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here, and thanks for the services you provide. The video marketplace has changed dramatically, to say the least, even in the last few years. Consumers have more options than ever to customize what works best for them based on price, content, connection, and more, as they ought to. I myself use over-the-air service to get my wonderful local broadcast channels. I hope that doesn't shock anybody. I also have accounts for streaming as well. This plethora of options is a result of letting the market work without heavy-handed government interference. Competition for programming and viewers is robust, and in this environment, we should be looking at ways we can make this marketplace even better for our constituents. Mr. LeGeyt, we've heard the term retransmission consent and retransmission consent fees cited as the reason that MVPD prices are so high in comparison to several virtual MVPDs. Can you please describe what is driving the rising cost of transmission consent fees?
Thank you for the question. Local broadcasters are competing for expensive content, we're competing for advertising dollars, and we're competing with for eyeballs with behemoths. You know, we've got a set of regulations that we operate under premised on the idea that broadcasters only compete with one another in local markets, and the reality is we compete with everyone. And the only way that we have the dollars to reinvest in local programming, and you know, I think in some ways the proof is in the pudding. Over the last decade, local news has increased by 78% in markets across the country, the time spent on local news coverage. We need those retransmission consent fees. The cost of doing business has gone up for all of us at the same time that the competition has become more fierce. And this is really about being able to reinvest in the local news, local programming that serves as the antidote to the type of disinformation on social media that I know this committee is so concerned with.
Yeah, very, very much so. Mr. Spellmeyer, how has the price of content from broadcasters versus the cost of other programming changed over the last several years? And secondly, is it more expensive to carry broadcast content versus other channels?
2 very good questions, sir. I direct you to the last page of my testimony. I've got a chart that documents aggregate retrans fees paid to all 4 broadcasters in one particular market of one of my members who's a relatively medium-sized provider. You know, it's 2023, $27 a month across the 4 broadcast networks. So it's substantial. I honestly do not know the answer to the question as to what my members on average pay for pricing to other content providers. You know, as an association, I try to stay away from the details of pricing in the marketplace, but I can direct you to the second chart, which talks about aggregate programming expense hitting $80 a month in that particular local market. So, you know, it might be a third of the total. And I think there are a couple of of networks such as ESPN that are particularly expensive for my members to acquire. All of it's driven by local, as I cited in my testimony, sports, not local. Sports programming drives overall programming costs to a considerable extent.
Surprise, surprise.
And, you know, and we all love sports, but that's how we got to where we're at.
Thank you. Mr. Gandler, as a virtual MVPD, Fubo isn't under the same retransmission regime as MVPDs. Yet services like yours still carry the broadcast channels that my constituents rely on for our local news, sports, and weather. How does your negotiating process work?
It's quite complicated, as you can imagine, sir.
Make it as simple as possible.
Yeah,
and
I wish.
Don't have to kill me if you tell me.
So, you know, essentially, we are negotiating with the 4 largest media companies that own the broadcast networks. And as part of those negotiations, they also act as a proxy for us in our retrans deals. It's important to note that if you look at our retrans escalators, right, we obviously started at a much higher price than any of the previous groups, whether it's telco or cable or satellite. But our escalators, if you look over the last 7 years since we've launched our platform, basically we are well ahead, multiples ahead of the inflation rate. And that includes 2021 and 2022. So it's quite expensive.
Thank you for your deference.
Well, no, thank you very much, and thank you for your questions. And just to let everybody know, when they set up today, they did not put the box in front of all of you with the lights. So the only light that we have is I guess when we have to start doing it, when time's expired, you'll hear, so you'll know. But I'm sorry that they did not put the boxes in front of us today, and it's for you as our witnesses, so sorry about that. The next member to ask questions is the gentleman from California's 29th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lara and Ranking Member Matsui for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us today before the American people. Americans have never had more options for accessing media content. Consumers can buy an antenna and watch broadcasts for free, or they can watch TV through their cable or satellite provider, or increasingly, consumers can turn to streaming. Streaming has allowed diverse content to flourish, something consumers have clearly been waiting for. As usual in the media economy, Latino consumers lead the way in transitioning to streaming services, with 43.6% of Latino audiences watching TV via streaming last year, compared to around 35% of the general audience. This shows the value of having diverse, inclusive content in a variety of languages, including Spanish, accessible across multiple platforms. Streaming has also given families options when deciding what they spend their resources on. This type of content choice is not possible without streaming platforms. Knowing that this shift in consumption patterns is happening, we need to meet consumers where they are. We need to make sure that viewers can watch the shows they want to see, get connected to trustworthy news that is relevant to them, and have flexibility to choose how they consume their media. Mr. Schwantes, as you talk about there has been a boom in consumer options in accessing TV content. We all agree the consumer should have flexibility and choice. Not so long ago, in order to watch local news and other video content, you had to be in front of a television at a certain time. Can you talk about the variety of options where Americans can consume local news and video content, which is critical for communities like the ones in my district, lower income and higher immigrant communities?
Thank you, Congressman. That's a great question. First, in the traditional MVPD, cable, satellite TV environment, DVRs are quite ubiquitous, so consumers can record the local news and watch it on their own schedule. But I will say in the streaming environment, from what I'm familiar with on streaming platforms, there are apps called like News On and Haystack where you can watch local news from across the country. I mean, I grew up in north central Wisconsin, and I miss my local news. And so I can use one of those apps to access that local news for all the reasons that we've heard today. I mean, we support our local broadcasters. We think it's very, very important content. And I agree, it's the the best defense against misinformation, as Mr. LeGeyt pointed out.
Thank you. Can you talk about how the boom in popularity of video streaming services has affected access to affordable non-English language programming?
Sure. Part of what we do at Consumer Reports is we review all kinds of things, not just cars. And we do look at streaming platforms. And we recommend them, and we go through the prices and how they work, et cetera. And what we discovered, I want to say in the last couple of years, Univision launched, they changed the name recently, but it's VIX. I think in Spanish it's pronounced VIX. It's free, ad-supported, or it's $6 a month for ad-free. But they have, it's like a VMVPD. It's got 50 channels, but children programming, live sports, a lot of soccer, but also content from Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, and that's a steal. Even it's free if you want to put up with the ads, or it's $6, and that has hundreds of thousands of programming on it, and it's all in Spanish. And I will say for the other streaming platforms, there's a lot of, when you go through the menus, there's a Spanish language option, so you can just look at that program as well, and let's not underestimate the value of subtitles.
Yeah, growing up my parents are immigrants from Mexico. Growing up, when I heard the word VIX, I thought something was going to be rubbed across my chest. For whatever ailed me, VIX was the solution. But on the topic of multi-language, with streaming being so available and it being available to all income levels, what do you see today and tomorrow looking like when it comes to more accessibility in that sense, or less accessibility? And if there's a cause and effect to more or less, what are the main factors?
I'll be succinct. I see more accessibility, but it all depends on the big, giant assumption in the room, broadband. None of this works without an affordable broadband connection. We at Consumer Reports are on record supporting the Affordable Connectivity Program, and that is the best way to get low-income Americans online. I don't think anyone here on the panel would disagree, and that is the key to streaming.
Okay. Well, we did more in the last couple of years when it comes to broadband in American history. Hopefully, we'll continue that trend going into the future. My time having expired. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, the vice chair of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. This is extremely important. Obviously, in this video marketplace, what we've seen over the last 30 years has been amazing and transformational, and no question about it. We all recognize that modernization is imperative, and that's why this hearing, Mr. Chairman, thank you, is so timely. Mr. Spellmeyer, I want to start with you. I noticed that different sports leagues, whether it be the NFL or the SEC, Go Dogs, or the Big Ten, are obtaining significant media rights, and that's causing a lot of disruption in the leagues and just the media fees, the media right fees that TV networks are obtaining. How does the rising cost of sports media rights affect cable companies?
It's directly related, and it's driving it, and I've acknowledged that. And it starts with the NFL and what that does to both broadcast costs as well as, let's call it ESPN and Amazon costs. And it goes from there. The NBA drives TNT and TBS costs, and it gets passed along to my members in a take-it-or-leave-it situation. And I want you to understand, this is so constrained. They stop us from the contracts that we have to sign, stop our members from telling anybody what the price is that we're paying for it, either separately or in the aggregate. And it's those kind of things that really make it difficult. People question retrans fees. We want to be able to put and clearly label retrans fees on customers' bills so people understand that in the aggregate, it costs you X for all 3 channels, or $12 for ABC, and I'm picking that out of the air. And if we don't, that gets us back to customer choice. We talked a long time ago about a la carte, and let's let consumers decide what they want to get and where they want to get it from. But please understand that the content providers are the ones forcing us to bundle this all up together. and
So
raise the
you're
price.
saying the NFL is the one that's causing you?
The NFL has done very well under Mr. Goodell's leadership over the last decade, and you see it in player salaries, and you see it in team valuations.
Okay. I want to ask all of you, the majority of the panelists here today, you either create your own content or you distribute content or maybe a combination of both. Should everyone on the panel have the same regulatory framework? Is that even possible? I'll start with you, Mr. LeGeyt.
Well, first off, I do want to acknowledge sports rights are the elephant in the room here. When we talk about what are the costs of putting on a product that are putting pressure on everyone in this media landscape, my networks, my affiliates, television, radio, it is sports rights, because as all of the viewing is getting disaggregated, the viewing that has the most value, especially to advertisers, is the viewing that you have to do in real time, and that's sports. That sports are the programming that you don't DVR it and watch it later. It has a lot of value. So that's putting pressure on all of us. In terms of the regulatory environment, I do think all of this is complicated, but there is no doubt that the regulatory framework that has enabled local broadcasters to negotiate retransmission consent with traditional pay TV and satellite companies for the last 30 years has resulted in tremendous investment in local content and local news to your community. And the FCC at least needs to examine whether, as audiences are migrating to streaming, that some elements of that regulatory framework may be relevant there.
Okay, Mr. Spellmeyer?
In 26 seconds.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We desperately need a level playing field. We need antitrust oversight, competition oversight. We need a level playing field. There's lots of ways to do that. You can see this is immensely complex. And my message in my opening statement is be careful what you do. This won't be a bill that we can pass in, one legislative hearing, but it's going to take some time, but it does need to happen, or the prices will continue to escalate, blackouts will continue, and consumers will lack choice.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And again, the chair will just probably have to say this several times since members are coming up from the other subcommittee. They failed to put the light boxes on the witness table, so at 5 minutes I will bring the gavel down so the witnesses know when time has expired. Our next member to ask questions is the gentlelady from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to you and Ranking Member Matsui for holding this really important hearing. It's been very interesting, and I appreciate all of your testimony and perspectives. There are a lot of things that have come up, and I think it's been a pretty frank conversation, which is useful, because I think it is complicated, and looking at it from the policy perspective, we have to understand the things that are good ideas and the things that are not good ideas. Mr. Schwantes, I'm going to come back to you about that, because you tempted all of us saying there were things you wouldn't support, so definitely want to hear more about that in your conversation with Congresswoman Eshoo. But I want to first follow up on something that you just said, Mr. Spellmeyer, when you were talking about the a la carte kind of provisions and options and talking about what's driving these costs and the lack of transparency. And so thinking of it from the consumer perspective, certainly I hear my constituents saying they have choices to buy packages full of things that they don't necessarily want, and that may be a part of why they're not buying the packages at all. They would like something. I know that's one of the suggestions that you made, Mr. Schwantes, to have, just a very basic package that people can get. But what do you think is the likelihood, given the landscape that you're in, that we're going to see that kind of a la carte selection when it comes to your members? And is that something that is going to be just dealt with? Do you think that's something that's really possible in the policy space and in the legislative space that we're talking about here, or that's going to just continue to evolve as the marketplace has so much over the last decade?
Yeah, so we have tried for several decades at ACA to push programmers to allow us to do a la carte or anything close to a la carte, and it is consistently rejected. It's you take the entire programmer's large aggregated bucket of content, and you got to put it all on. And so that, I think it's part of the Charter Disney thing. It's part of what Charter wanted to do. They're not a member of mine, but I'll tell you that based on what I understand, they made some progress in terms of getting Disney to allow them to offer a couple of packages that were slightly smaller than the giant packages that are there today. And so maybe a little bit of movement there, but for my members without leverage over the content providers, it's a, sorry, take it or leave it.
Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Schwantes, I want to come back to you because I appreciated your written testimony and sort of suggestions that you made. And you said in your opening statement as well as in your testimony that we need to be thinking about what's working, what's not working. It piqued my interest when you said there's some things I wouldn't do, because I think that kind of insight, knowing how much you're studying this marketplace and understand what consumers want and what's sort of a reasonable landscape. I'm particularly interested in what you don't support, if you want to share that with us, and then also kind of just open it up to you on some of the things that you think sort of are working and are not working. And I guess what I'd love to get a sense of your priorities. What should be our priorities as we're doing this work?
Thank you, Congresswoman Fletcher. I'll start by saying we don't support converting or applying the Cable Act to VMVPDs like Fubo and YouTube TV. That proceeding was started in 2014, and I do agree with my other friends on the panel that the world has changed significantly in 9 years, but I don't think taking an old law from 1992, before we even thought about the internet, and applying it to VMVPDs is the way to go. That said, and this might surprise some folks, we think less regulation could be a good thing, but we have to agree on some core things. There are great things in the broadcaster and cable world that don't apply to YouTube TV and virtual MVPDs, like privacy protections. That is something that we've got strong privacy in cable and broadcast world. That's something, as we take away all the laws, it was just imagine like no Cable Act, how are we going to figure it out? And things like that, price transparency. What are we going to do on children's programming and educational programming? What are we going to do on privacy? What about diversity? And let's have a conversation about media ownership caps. And then bring it back to low cost. I mean, basic cable was a creation from the 92 Cable Act. It's supposed to be the local channels and some public access channels. That was kind of designed for like, if you want nothing else, you can get that. If you're a low-income household, if you just want your basic channels. Well, we have in some markets now, the broadcast TV fee is higher than the basic cable fee. And which one is paying for which? And so those plans, I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. That's not cheap at $50 or $60 a month. But I think that's the conversation we need to have is let's start over. Let's figure out what we can all agree on. And then but as everyone said, it's complicated and it's tough.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thanks to all of you. It is complicated, it's tough, and with 5 minutes, none of us can really get to all of the things that we would like to cover. But I appreciate your insights, and I think this is a really important conversation to have. And I thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Matsui, for bringing us together for this hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. I think this is an important topic that resonates throughout America today. It has been too many years since we've addressed this issue. We've recognized that and discussed it frequently today. And the video programming market has drastically changed since then, with the advent of streaming and the new media options that consumers are embracing. My constituents in Pennsylvania's 13th district are some of thousands of Americans negatively affected by TV blackouts. And at this very moment, during this very hearing, 4 counties and 350,000 constituents of mine in the Altoona-Johnstown area are without their CBS affiliate, WTAJ. From critical weather alerts to groundbreaking investigative news and information within the community, local journalism is the backbone of America, especially in rural Pennsylvania. This blackout, along with others, underscores the current problems that the industry and the consumers are currently facing. Mr. Spellmeyer, what reforms do you anticipate that this market will need to prevent blackouts from occurring and create sustainable access to local news?
Thank you, Congressman Joyce. I will say that I'm going to try to keep this at a at a high level, I figured someone would ask me a question about how do we fix this? I think we need an equal footing for all players in the marketplace. I think we need to protect consumers from the runaway rates that they've experienced over the course of the last 2 decades, driven, as we've discussed, by sports programming and other small segments of the market. And that third, that choice is a priority. And that's where I discussed a la carte here. So I guess I've already hit all 3 that I outlined on my note card, but if we don't, there's still those blackouts are real. I know that consumers in those marketplaces have the opportunity to go and still grab over-the-air signals, but how many of us have rabbit ears laying around our house?
Very
right now
few.
to go out and do it. And do you know how to unplug the back of your TV and plug that one in? I don't.
Mr. Spellmeyer, addressing a different issue, the cost of getting content is also impacted by the costs of fiber that we are building. So the regulatory environment that isn't actually so exciting to some people, but important, issues like pole attachment fees, cost to cross a railroad, access to federal rights-of-way, they all add up. So content costs are one major component of the consumer's bill, but so is the actual cost of building, maintaining, and upgrading the networks. So do you feel that permitting and regulatory relief would be essential to your business?
Absolutely essential. My members have been really busy over the course of the last 5 years. Over the course of the last 5 years, we've grown the number of homes passed in the aggregate by 1/3. And we did that during a pandemic. We're very focused on building broadband. The biggest issue that we hit, I've been out meeting my members over the course of the last 18 months as I took this job. The number one consistent issue that comes up is not retransmission consent. It is the cost of access to rights of way and what we need to deploy those broadband assets. And it can be the subject of an entire additional hearing, but it's the most talked about thing that I get. And thank you for your leadership on it.
Mr. LeGeyt, during this hearing, we've heard about the outdated regulations that apply to broadcasters. In your opinion, which regulations do you believe have a detriment to your business specifically?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And first and foremost, the idea that local broadcasters compete and are restrained with restrictions on our scale, 39% ownership cap on our ability to reach national audiences in the country, local ownership rules that impact our scale. You know, we are in a world where we're competing every day with YouTube, Facebook for advertising dollars. This is stifling our ability to compete fairly for those dollars. And similarly, and no one here would suggest that the system is perfect, but the retransmission consent system has enabled local broadcasters to invest in local programming, local content. Without it, we look a lot more like the newspaper industry. I think everyone in this room knows how that story is ending right now. It has been critical to enabling local broadcasters to invest in communities, invest in news. The shift of audiences from cable and satellite over to these, cable replacement services, the VMVPDs, is going to impact those revenues, and this is something that the expert agency, the FCC, needs to take a look at.
My time has expired. I thank all the witnesses for being with us here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan's 6th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and Ranking Member Matsui for holding this hearing. I think we're all talking about a lot of issues we could probably use a lot more hearings on because the media landscape has changed so much since our last hearing on this topic, and we really need to be talking about what Congress should be doing, how we work with you. There's so much we can talk about, but because the time's limited, I'm going to focus on the state of programming for children. Our best local broadcasters often remain the backbones of our communities, not only providing critical journalism and emergency alerts, but also contributing in other ways beyond the screen, such as hosting community service projects, job fairs, and food drives. I love all of my local stations, and everybody knows that. For years, broadcasters were the gold standard when it came to trusted children's content, from Sesame Street to Saturday morning cartoons and everything in between. We knew, by and large, that when something was airing on one of our local broadcast channels, there were standards in place to keep the content safe for our kids. With the proliferation of streaming, there have never been more options for parents looking for programming for their children. Unfortunately, while there's a lot of positive educational online content, one can also find some pretty dangerous rabbit holes, disturbing imagery, programming with little educational value, excessive commercials in online spaces that children are frequenting. Moreover, we know well in this subcommittee that too many families still do not have broadband that is required to access all this new online content. Many still rely on traditional platforms like broadcasting and cable to access educational programming for children. Indeed, at the height of the pandemic, Michigan public television stations altered their entire broadcast schedule to reach families without broadband or commuter access with age-appropriate educational programming. It was a lifeline for families in a challenging time. Mr. Schwantes, can you speak to the state of children's programming? What advice does Consumer Reports have for parents navigating this increasingly difficult landscape?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I will agree. The broadcasters are the gold standard here for children's programming. We've had laws on the books since the 90s. They're called KidVid in the jargon to regulate the kind of content. Unfortunately, some of those rules were relaxed in 2019, so they can air earlier on the weekend, and they no longer need to be 30 minutes in length. And we lost the trust mark, EI, so a parent could see that was educational programming. But I do agree that the migration to streaming, this is one of the dark sides that we've seen. We have our friends at Common Sense Media. They cited a survey taken by Pew that 80% of parents do put their kids in front of YouTube for children's content, but 60% of them are like, I saw some things I didn't really like. And also the advertising. On the broadcast world, that advertising is regulated with regards to how much advertising can occur during children's programming. I think this is definitely one of those, what do we value in a healthy video marketplace? This is a huge, huge issue, and we are concerned about it, and I'm glad you raised it.
Thank you. I know we got 1 minute and 30 seconds left, so Mr. LeGeyt, can you discuss broadcasters' commitment to providing high-quality educational programming to local communities?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, and it's great to see you. This is one of the core tenets of local broadcasting. Our commitment to families is, I think, what makes local broadcasting unique in this media landscape. You know, as a father of 3 children under the age of 11, I'm proud of the fact that I can sit down on a Sunday morning or after school and be very, very comfortable that the programming that my children are going to consume on broadcast television isn't something I'm going to need to turn the channel on. And broadcasters very much, I think, serve as a strong alternative to all those diversions online that we are very concerned on. You know, the reforms to children's programming rules that were referenced a moment ago, I think have actually been very beneficial for my local station's ability to provide children with the programming in the form and at the times and in the length that they are going to be most likely to access it. I mean, our kids' viewing habits have changed. Asking a kid to sit down and watch a 30-minute program, that's not what my children are doing these days, and broadcasters have been able to provide children, thanks to those reforms, and appreciate your work on that, that is going to meet them where they are.
Thank you. Children in the United States account for about 22% of our population, but they're 100% of our future, and this matters. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia's 12th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me get over here to the microphone. We need to raise these chairs in here a little bit. Maybe update them. But thank you for holding this important hearing. And as mentioned, it's been a long time, 3 decades since we passed the Cable Act, which was last updated. And of course, the state of the video marketplace has changed drastically. And I have to admit, I was a part of that. I was a guest and part of that deal where we didn't get to watch football. So I tried your 1 month free service. And I got to deal with that later. But anyway, it was very frustrating, but I got it done. I was the hero of the group, let me tell you. But you know, cable subscribers are really confused. I mean, it's like I said, all of a sudden, and technology is this way, it becomes very frustrating. And you know, you got internet streaming services like Fubo, and you get more competition in the market. You got television broadcasters have great 21st century technology, like the ATSC3 TV, and that they are prepared to fully utilize. This is also a time of great disruption in this market, and I think we've talked about that a great deal today. Obviously, the blackout is the subject, and how annoying that was right before college football season. And again, I like the information about the fact that it's sports that's controlling this. You know, this weekend, you know, many of my constituents were not able to watch some of their most popular football games, and you know, I'm sure our phones are burning up saying, "Hey, you got to fix this." And but throughout these market changes, public trust in our national media continues to plummet. To be honest with you, nearly 3/4 of U.S. adults say the news media is increasing political polarization in this country, and just under half say they have little or no trust in the media's ability to report the news fairly and accurately. And on top of these stats, political and ad spending for 2024 is expected to shatter $10 billion, more than 3 times what it was in 2016. Local journalism has never been more important, with Americans' trust in that institution remaining strong. More than twice as many Americans have higher emotional trust in local journalists than in the national news, and I experienced that in my own district. As Congress reviews federal regulations of the video marketplace, it's important that we look for ways to improve competition in the marketplace, remove redundant regulations, all while protecting local journalism. Questions for the entire panel. From your perspective, how would the video market change if Congress regulated all of it like traditional cable services are currently regulated? And we'll just go from left to right here.
I think this landscape is far too complicated to paint with a broad brush. And so what we have been advocating is for the FCC to take a refreshed look at all of this, to do what this committee is doing today, look at all these changes in viewer habits, and assess the impact on localism. There are some really important vestiges of the regulations that have governed the relationship, certainly between local broadcasters and cable and satellite systems. Retransmission consent during the last 30 years has been critical to our reinvestment in local, but there's some regulations that are clearly outdated, the most significant of which is caps on our ability to gain the type of scale that allows us to better compete with YouTube.
Y'all don't
and
have
Facebook.
a clock, but I only have 40 seconds left, so we got to go real quick.
So I'll go fast and say prices will go up and confused consumers will be even more confused and concerned.
Well, I'll have to agree, sorry. Okay. I'll have to agree. Prices will absolutely go up. Retrans will require you to negotiate the same sports deal twice, once with the national broadcaster and then again with the local affiliate. And all of those deals are specifically set up to expire right before football season.
And I'll be quick. Yeah, it'll be higher prices for consumers, and it'll be more blackouts or impasses.
Well, consumers are not going to be happy about this. No. Okay,
We know.
with that, I'll yield back. The gentleman yields back, and this time the chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been said already several times today that the public is consuming video more than ever, whether it's for news, sports, entertainment, or education. And in many ways, competition and choice means that there's never been a better time to be a consumer in this market. But in my opinion, consumers should be at the heart of these discussions, and any committee work should be focused on helping consumers in the marketplace. So let me ask Mr. Schwantes, what types of practices in the video marketplace affect consumer satisfaction positively and negatively, and how do we make sure that these services are affordable for all consumers, including low-income consumers, if you will?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll be quick. I'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is there's more content than ever before. I think if you count both linear and streaming, the number of titles available for consumers to watch is 2.7 million different programs. And that's up like 1 million in just the last couple of years. So that is mind-boggling. And also just the kind of choice. There's all different kind of streaming platforms and have different packages of content that is not like the traditional cable bundle. So that's the good. The bad, we touched on it. It's junk fees in the cable TV market, and that is a large part due to rising costs for broadcast television. And unfortunately, those fees are not included in the advertised price. And so, that $25 broadcast TV fee, that's the gotcha moment when on your first month's bill. What else? I will say the ugly are blackouts. I think we've spent a lot of oxygen on that today, so I'll pass over that. And then just in general is broadband. None of this works without broadband. And we have to make sure it's affordable in this country. And that's why, the Affordable Connectivity Program is getting more low-income consumers online. But also in the streaming world, yes, some things are more expensive than others, but there are ad-supported apps that are absolutely free. And Consumer Reports we review this every year, and we recommend a lot of consumers to look at that. And I would be remiss to mention, and I do agree with Curtis, we routinely recommend to consumers. The bunny ears are antiquated. There are digital antennas that would look nothing like what I grew up with. And if you're close to an urban area, you may indeed be getting high-quality television over the air for free.
Well, let me ask you something else. Let me mention, I certainly am a big advocate for local journalism. I'm sure that's true for, all members of the House of Representatives, because we want, local journalism. And that, I think provides our best local, it's the broadcast stations really that are providing most of the local or the best local journalisms. I worry that online platforms and social media spread a lot of misinformation, disinformation. But you have the public interest obligations required of broadcasters to promote localism, competition, and diversity. And I think that explains why today we trust, or at least I do, trust our broadcasters more than the unregulated social media companies. So, Mr. Schwantes, do you agree that the public interest standard we have for broadcasters is part of the reason why broadcasters remain among the most trusted news sources in this country?
I do, Congressman. Absolutely, they have an obligation going all the way back to the 1934 Communications Act to serve their local communities, and part of that is a trust, and it's a standard of journalism that we support. And it's complicated when you talk about the online world, but that is a good place to start.
Well, thanks. And Mr. LeGeyt, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you for the question and acknowledging those obligations. Those public interest obligations are at the core of who we are as local broadcasters. Ranking Member Matsui early in the hearing raised the point of digital equity. There is no more equitable platform than local broadcasters. We are freely available to consumers of all socioeconomic stripes. So our ability to deliver trusted information, the most local, combined with our network's investment in must-watch entertainment, must-watch sports, it is the most incredible value proposition for consumers in this landscape. We can talk a lot about the regulatory regime, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're doing in local communities what no one else is doing right now.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I had one more question, but I think it'll lead to an extra 2 minutes or so I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say that before we figured out that we had a problem with the witnesses not having lights, the chair did go over, so if you'd like to ask another question.
This is Mr. Gandler. In your testimony, you say that streaming companies can be more consumer-centric and your company prides itself on price transparency, contract-free service, and no junk fees. However, some say that the current marketplace is unsustainable. Earlier this year, we saw Fubo, is that it? Fubo impose a regional sports network fee to cover costs associated with providing local sports coverage. So my question is, where do you think this is trending? Is the current business model sustainable, or do you think that over time streaming services will start to look more like some of the more traditional options?
Yes, thank you for your question. Well, first of all, we offer a free trial so people can test the service and ensure that they enjoy the content that they are receiving. Moreover, we offer reminders to customers before that trial period's over, reminding them that they're going to go into a paid service momentarily. And last but not least, we highlight the regional sports fee prominently in the flow once we understand what geography you're in, because there is an overlap of different RSNs. Some cities, as you know, may have 7, 8, 9 teams. Madison Square Garden Network, for instance, has 5 hockey teams. So once we understand, at the checkout flow where you are, we again prominently provide that. I think the market is very strong. You have lots of different services that are available at different price points, all the way from free to $80, $90, $100 or more. People can consume content. They can readily switch services. There's no friction. So there's a lot of value in what people provide. What I will say, most importantly, is that the bundle is still king. The average Fubo customer watches over 100 hours of programming per month. People like to have all of their content in one place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio's 12th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gandler, I don't have a question for you, but it's funny, Mr. Allen and I were just talking Fubo. I no disrespect, sir, but I'm living in the hills of southeastern Ohio, and I actually got an email from my Charter Spectrum on Saturday that says, hey, get a hold of Fubo and do a free trial. So thank you for Spectrum is out there helping you. So, and he just tried to get on.
I did the same thing.
All right, Mr. Spellmeyer, thank you for being here too. And several live TV streaming services known as VMVPDs have begun offering skinny bundles that provide their customers with a small bundle of live TV options, offering more consumer choice. Obviously, we would like everyone to be able to compete in this marketplace, but in this respect, and as Mr. Gandler mentioned in his testimony, these new services can offer more choices to consumers, and the data shows that consumers are taking advantage of this flexibility. Can you explain why some traditional TV providers do not offer this service to their consumers, and what can be done to provide more consumer choice and promote competition in the industry?
Yeah, as I've discussed at several points in this hearing, that really goes to that issue of consumer choice, and I'll call it a la carte or skinny bundles or small packages. My members have pushed very hard against the programmers to try to get that over a period of time of a decade, and the content providers won't let us do it. I've talked about market power. My guys are small, they're rural, they serve a county or two. The programmers just look at them and say, no, not going to let you do that. Now, YouTube TV has had some success in breaking that model, in part because they're Google. And Google's got a lot more market power than Boycom Cable does in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Or the numerous providers that we have as members in Ohio. We don't have the power to break it, and it is good for consumers, and we've talked about that extensively. We should try to do it.
Thank you. Mr. LeGeyt, thank you for being here. And the Columbus media market, which serves a large portion of my congressional district that I represent, has 5 local broadcasters that are broadcasting their content on HD channels and ATSC 3.0, also known as Next Gen TV. In your testimony, you touch on Next Gen TV and the new opportunities and benefits that it provides for both TV stations and consumers. Can you discuss the viewer benefits and give an update on where mitigation to Next Gen TV stands?
Absolutely, Congressman. Thank you for the question. we're tremendously proud of this rollout that's going on across the country of next generation television. This is an upgraded over-the-air standard that will allow viewers to access for free a 4K picture, immersive audio, more interactive programming, hyper-localized weather and news. Make no mistake, as we're talking about the future of sports rights, as we're talking about the service we provide to our communities, our ability to provide that type of viewer experience is table stakes to ensuring that we can maintain our audience versus the Apple TVs and the Amazons of the world. Right now, we are deployed in 70 markets. 65% of the country can access some sort of next-gen television, but we are in the midst of this transition. It's tough because as opposed to an AT&T or Verizon who can just upgrade to a 5G, we need the entire industry rowing in the same direction. We need the consumer electronics industry on board. We need the consumer groups on board. So we are very supportive of the FCC's recent launch in partnership with the NAB of a Future of Television initiative that is enabling that transition and really, I think, sets a framework to get this transition from where it is today to completion nationwide so that every consumer can access these benefits.
Okay, thank you very much. My last question, excuse me, is from Mr. Gandler again. Well, not again, but the 2014 FCC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking regarding the VMVPDs has been frequently discussed leading up to this hearing. You mentioned in your testimony that if these rules were adopted, the cost of FuboTV and similar services would increase, ultimately being passed on to the consumer. I've heard similar concerns from across the industry. Could you tell me why being regulated as an MVPD would increase costs and how significant that increase would be for your business and consumers? And I'm going to stop you because I'm out of time, but if you could submit that answer, Absolutely. That would be great. We'll get that to you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Chairman.
much. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member, Matsui, for holding this hearing, as well as our panel of esteemed witnesses for joining us today to discuss and examine the ever-changing industry. Television was once an industry comprised of just a few local broadcast networks delivering a limited number of linear television channels to local consumers over the air at no cost, and is morphed into the multi-billion-dollar video marketplace of today, comprised of broadcast networks, cable, satellite providers, and online video distributors, offering both linear and nonlinear programming through a variety of platforms beyond a traditional television set. Unfortunately, too many of these platforms are owned or controlled by a handful of multinational corporations with complex, often competing financial interests driving corporate decision-making with the ability to impact millions of consumers. While the corporate interests, technological advances, and policy choices that led to the current state of affairs have undoubtedly unleashed unprecedented consumer choice for video content consumption, there remains much work to be done by both policymakers and the private sector to ensure the long-term viability of the sector. And while competition and consumer choice will rightly be a major topic of conversation today, I want to focus on the importance of diverse and independent voices within the video marketplace and media ecosystem more broadly. Diversity in media goes beyond mere representation. It's about including voices from different racial, ethnic, gender, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds, and reflecting the tapestry of experiences and perspectives found across our nation. Moreover, a diverse media landscape can create economic opportunity for the historically marginalized communities and is essential for a healthy democracy by ensuring citizens can make informed decisions on critical issues. Given our nation's unfortunate history of discrimination and withholding of opportunities of marginalized communities, we must take care to not entrench the inequities of today when crafting policies that spur the innovations of tomorrow. We all must continue to support policies that encourage diversity in media, and I look forward to introducing legislation in the coming weeks to do just that. My first question is directed to Mr. LeGeyt. Thank you for joining us today. I understand the difficult position broadcasters are forced into as tech firms and larger conglomerates use streaming services as loss leaders to compete for market share. The important role broadcasters play as trusted sources for local news on a daily basis and in providing communities like mine with a crucial lifeline during times of emergency cannot be overstated, and I thank you. So, Mr. LeGeyt, how might the suggested FCC reforms you mentioned in your prepared testimony impact diversity in media in terms of both content and ownership? And what would you say are the biggest obstacles to increasing diversity across the media landscape?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Diversity in media is top of mind for all of us at the NAB and across the industry. I mean, we are advocating for reinstatement of the FCC's tax certificate program to incentivize sales to diverse broadcast owners. We run a broadcast leadership training program out of our foundation that ensures that the leadership in our industry better reflects the diversity of the communities that we serve. And we are hyper-focused on producing toolkits for our journalists across the country to ensure that the reporting on racially sensitive issues matches the needs of the community. But none of this will impact what is on the screen, what is reaching living rooms across the country, if the broadcast industry isn't one that would-be investors, including diverse investors, are willing to come into. And so we need to ensure that we can gain the scale to compete with the YouTubes and the Facebooks of the world. Local broadcasters are subject to ownership restrictions that no one else in the media landscape is subject to. That chills investment. There's uncertainty as to how broadcast transactions will be reviewed at the FCC, what the timeline will look like, whether they will receive an up or down vote. That chills potential investment. So all of these are areas of focus for this committee to ensure greater diversity in broadcasting.
Very well. I have 4 seconds, so if you gentlemen would submit to me some of your thoughts in writing, that would be extremely helpful. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here today. And really, I don't know that I have a question. I just want to go over some of the notes that I have, and you tell me if I'm wrong, okay? And yes, I do have Spectrum, and I couldn't watch the ball games. And I don't know how he got Fubo for a month, and mine said a week. You better,
Mine said a week.
Okay, Rick, okay. You better check your cable bill.
I haven't gotten a notice. That was
Well, Well, I didn't sign up. I'm just saying, I went to my son's and watched YouTube TV. Anyway.
I noticed yet, by the way. On payment.
Okay. Well, let me see if I've got all this right so we can regulate or deregulate, okay? We've got decades-old regulations, and it stifles traditional TV providers and streaming platforms, it looks like, are able to flourish in a deregulated markets. So, Mr. Spellmeyer, you said that retransmission fees are basically under a gag order, and I call it that because we don't know what they're charging. And Mr. LeGeyt, you said we need to reinvest in local programming, basically, and you all said we need an a la carte system and a service from content providers who won't allow us to have that right now, which I would love to have that. You all said that sports rights cost a whole lot of money, and it's putting pressure on these program providers due to real-time viewing and advertising. And Mr. LeGeyt, you said FCC needs to examine retransmission consent as the number of customers go to streaming. We need antitrust and oversight. And Mr. Schwantes, I do have a subscription to Consumer Reports too, just FYI. You don't support applying the Cable Act to streaming, and you would prefer less regulations. So I guess the bottom line is we need price transparency and more freedom of choice. Am I correct? Anybody can answer. You all four need to answer.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Well,
Yeah, you were paying careful attention.
I'm a pharmacist. I have to have the details correct, or I could kill somebody. So just like that month versus a week. So, I mean, look, I look at, okay, I'll look at what we do with, LeGeyt, what you do. I mean, it's a national security issue when it comes to like the fires in Maui. We have to have the AM radio. We have to have an infrastructure that will support all that. I live in a rural area where broadband is imperative to getting streaming. And, you know, I look at what they're wanting to do with the vehicles now, and you only have streaming. The people I serve, they drive gasoline cars, and they listen to AM radio. So we have to have that as an option and choices. And, you know, competition makes everything better, and it makes everybody better. So did I get anything wrong? I hope your answer is no.
No.
Okay, good. I'll continue my subscription with Consumer Reports.
And thank you for being a subscriber to Consumer Reports. No, the issue on the cable bundle, and maybe I can answer since I'm not a cable company and I'm not a content provider. For many, many years, the cable bundle, and let's go back to the 90s or even 20 years ago, all of those large, I mean, first of all those channels that we know,
Yeah.
there aren't many independent channels out there. So Disney owns, I don't know off the top of my head, 10, 20 channels.
Why couldn't I get Nat Geo on there? They wouldn't allow that back on the network.
Yeah, because that was part of the deal that they got with Charter. So it's sort of like, what do we like, and what are we willing to sacrifice? And so that we'd have to ask the CEO of Charter. But a lot of the big must-have programming, whether it's the local channels, I mean, the local channels are gold for local broadcasting and live sports. It is expensive to cut deals with the major sports leagues, and that is driving a lot of costs for retrans and all across the industry. But all of those big fees paid to ESPN subsidize Nat Geo and these smaller channels. And the fear, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but if you just had them a la carte, do those channels survive? Because let's just say 50 million people want ESPN, but 500,000 want Nat Geo Wild. Like, they're really, really fun one.
That's the one I
But that
want.
can't sustain it if you tell Nat Geo Wild, you tell Nat Geo, like, well, you can only survive on what you get from subscribers. And they'll be like, maybe it was the thing that no one wanted to talk about, the cross-subsidization.
Okay. Okay, I'm out of time now. Well, I'll talk to you guys later, offline. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the committee for this important hearing. This discussion is timely, as many households in my district in northern New Hampshire are currently experiencing the consequences of a breakdown in the TV marketplace. Over this past week, I've heard directly from constituents who can no longer access Channel 9 News due to a blackout of the local broadcasting station, WMUR, on their cable TV provider. Granite City's rely on WMUR to get their daily weather and traffic updates, emergency alerts, and to stay up to date on what's happening in their community and across this country. Let me be clear, this blackout is the result of a business contract dispute, but it's the consumer who gets caught in the middle and pays the price. Mr. Schwantes, you stated that blackouts have been on the rise in recent years. Would you consider these blackouts a sign that the current structure of the video marketplace is no longer serving these customers?
Certainly, it's one of the things that we point out as being very disturbing and anti-consumer, and I would say one of the worst things in the current marketplace that we need to address. There are some novel ideas out there, and again, there's no silver bullet here, but even if you had sort of a 60-day cooling off mediation period for the thorniest disputes, so you do not have the channels, because it's tough, it cuts both ways. I mean, think about Disney. Were they really willing to let $2.2 billion sit on the table? How long can they sustain that when they're trying to make Disney Plus profitable? So both sides have a lot to gain. Both sides have a lot to lose. For us at Consumer Reports, it's easy. Consumers end up getting the short end of the stick in either scenario. Because if ultimately when they do cut a deal and those prices go up, consumers pay it.
And it's dangerous. I mean, we have extreme weather events in my district, and if people can't get the information. So I think we can agree that it's a lose-lose-lose with the blackout. They're bad for local broadcasters, bad for cable providers, but mostly they hurt consumers who lose access to local news station and the programming they rely upon. Mr. LeGeyt, as you know, local broadcasting stations provide trusted reporting for communities around the country, including in my district, but the current marketplace has put their future in jeopardy as costs are on the rise and consumers have moved to non-traditional video platforms. I'll have to say, including in our household, in terms of following every last game of the U.S. Open. How do we ensure that local broadcasting can continue to operate now and into the future?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Local broadcasting relies on two revenue streams: advertising, and that market has been completely overrun with the market power of Google and Facebook and the digital platforms, and retransmission consent, which allows local stations to reinvest in local news, local programming. Some criticisms have been raised today on the current system that has governed broadcasters' relationship between with the cable and satellite companies for the last 30 years, but it has unquestionably resulted in a system where in 210 unique markets around the country, individual local broadcast stations can invest in local news, local programming, and aren't just running national feeds. And it's a real testament to our legal regime that we have something no other country has in that regard. With regard to So as we look at streaming and audiences cutting the cord and moving to some of these cable replacement services online, I think it's imperative that the expert agency, the FCC, looks at the impact that that's going to have on localism and whether there are elements of the regime that governs cable and satellite that ought to be considered or something new. I think we've all concluded here this is complicated. I do want to also say, with regard to the retransmission consent impasse that you raised with WMUR, we understand how important that station is to your local constituents. The station is still freely available over the air, and it will continue to be. But it is important to hone in a little bit here that we talk about these impasses as an industry-wide problem. Over the last 5 years, two companies, one of which is relevant here, Dish and DirecTV, have been responsible for nearly 90% of the impasses nationwide in retransmission consent negotiations. So let's call this what it is, which is a problem with two companies.
So I should probably add, and certainly for the benefit of my Republican colleagues, this is for our country as well with the First in the Nation primary, but my time is up and I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Idaho for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. LeGeyt, local broadcasters, as we've discussed, face certain regulatory restrictions, and you've touched on some of that. How many stations on a single company can own, what type of programming must be aired, how often, types of programming that are allowed, not allowed because you operate on the public airwaves. You're king for a day. Just very quickly, can you speak to some of those specific rules? Which ones are the most outdated? What can be reformed and eliminated? And if you were king for a day, quickly, if you give me a summary.
The media ownership restrictions that local broadcasters operate under are vestiges of a bygone era. You know, the notion that a broadcaster only competes with other broadcasters for viewership and for advertising dollars, which these rules are premised on, is clearly, as we've discussed today, not the modern media landscape. That is not to say that every local broadcaster would suddenly go and expand its footprint, but broadcasters need the flexibility to invest in that scale in order to compete with Google and Facebook. Now, similarly, the rules of the road that have applied to local broadcasters' relationship with cable and satellite companies for the last 30 years have unquestionably resulted in investment in local news, local entertainment that is unique to 210 different markets in the country. The FCC needs to take a look as the expert agency on how to ensure that same investment in localism as streaming proliferates.
Okay. Mr. Spellmeyer, your comments on that, please.
I was going to try to interject myself to say that, just to steal from Hollywood, you're going to need a bigger boat in order to fix this problem. You cannot expect that the customers who subscribe to local cable programming are going to continue to be able to entirely support local broadcasting. Curtis talked about how he's lost the advertising side, and what he's got left is the retrans side, and the cable industry may not be around long enough to continue to fund that. So it's a long-term challenge.
Okay, so let me just ask you a little bit more specific question. What if we just eliminated regulations? We just eliminated them around rates charged and services provided to consumers. Would that make cable more competitive?
It would make cable more competitive, and I would be supportive of that as the better of solution than continuing the way we are. There may be other solutions in between, but yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm going to shift gears. Mr. Gandler. Some of the advantages and disadvantages with allowing small MVPDs, those with fewer than 500,000 subscribers. What about buying groups? What about being able to leverage those small organizations with a buying group? Would that help in terms of negotiation? I'd like to get your thoughts and comments of that.
Yeah, that's something I'm also looking for. We are a very unique company. We are small, relatively small. This year we'll be at about 1.2 to 1.3 million customers in North America, and we can't join the NCTC because it's facilities based, so there's no place for us to join. And this is a company that has grown up in a very complicated marketplace with programmers and broadcasters who are looking to take advantage of our size. So that would be very helpful. Perhaps maybe having the opportunity to join on the cable side might make sense.
Got about 40 seconds left, but there's another related question, and because I was just looking from your written testimony. You expressed concern with FCC and other rules that would have online video providers and streaming platforms to negotiate with broadcasters over content the broadcasters don't own. I didn't fully understand your thoughts. Can you unpack that?
Yes,
about
please.
20
I think
seconds?
this is probably the most important point at this hearing, is the fact that it sounds like what's been conflated today is local sports and local broadcast. The reality is there are 4 broadcasters who own basically college football, pro football, the Olympics, the World Series, and programming that really matters, must-have programming. And the problem with retrans is we're already negotiating these expensive rates. Having to negotiate retrans rates will effectively increase the price that much more.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, I'm out of time. Yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois 2nd District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Latta and Ranking Member Matsui, for holding this afternoon's hearing. It is important that this subcommittee address how the video marketplace has changed and the impact on its consumers. With this changing landscape, consumers deserve to have a choice, and to me that means access to their local stations as well as popular cable networks. And that's why I'm disheartened, like my colleague was, by the ongoing blackout in areas that I represent in Chicago, where local TV stations like WGN went dark on DirecTV's platform. And as you've heard, Chicago's not alone. Such blackouts have been increasingly common and are impacting more consumers. So I join many of my constituents in hoping a resolution can be reached to ensure my constituents can continue to view their favorite network programming, live sporting events, local news, and other local content relevant to them. However, to ensure consumers have access to content relevant to their daily lives, it is essential that entities within the video ecosystem maintain diverse and inclusive coverage to provide better representation of the communities they serve and to continue building audience interest. Mr. LeGeyt, I was encouraged to see on NAB's website your organization's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in broadcasting. What type of initiatives have you supported that improve diversity in broadcasting and create new opportunities for women, for people of color, and other represented communities? And you might comment on your leadership training program also.
Thank you so much for the question and the acknowledgement, because our work in this space in partnership with our industry is arguably the element of our association that I'm most proud of. Our broadcast leadership training program, which is really the gold standard amongst a litany of training programs that we provide on the sales side, on the engineering side, early on in careers, as well as advancing up through middle management. Our broadcast leadership training program is really meant to hone in on the next generation of leaders in the broadcast industry, and giving them exposure through a year-long executive MBA-styled program to the elements of the business that they might not otherwise have awareness of. So if you've been a very, very successful salesperson, you're going to get exposed in this program to the financial side of the business, the programming side of the business. It is focused on ensuring that especially diverse leaders in the industry who have high potential get that training, get that business experience, and can rise to the top of their companies. And it's been tremendously successful. Also equips those interested in getting into station ownership with training on how to do that on the financial side. So it's a program that we are very, very proud of. It is now more than 20 years in existence and growing every year.
Do you know how many have gone on to own their own stations by any chance?
I can provide you with that data. I can tell you that it is a substantial number that either have gone on to own their own stations or have advanced to the C-suite within their companies.
And can you speak a little bit about the barriers when it comes to access to capital? Because that still seems like a problem.
It's a huge problem, and just to step back for a moment, the broadcast industry is one right now that's undergoing a lot of transition for all the reasons that we've talked about today. There is a lot of uncertainty as to what investment in the broadcast space will look like in terms of an FCC review. There's a lot of questions about broadcast viability in this space that's increasingly dominated by big tech in light of the constraints on any station group's ability to gain necessary size and scale. All of that is chilling some investment. And so as it relates to access to capital, has lenders asking questions as to what this industry looks like 10, 20 years down the line, as well as the fact that the FCC license itself is not considered an asset and collateral in a transaction. So what we've tried to do is educate would-be lenders, especially in small markets, as to the value of this industry and why it's a worthwhile investment.
Do you think the tax certificate program should be reinstated? Just tell me
yes.
And I'm going to go real quick for all of you. Do you think it's time for Congress, this committee, to look at modernizing the rules of the road? You can just say yes or no, because I don't have.
Yes.
The rules of the road for the video marketplace? Yes.
No.
Yes, it's time to modernize.
Okay. I can't ask you why you said no, but I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas's 11th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. As a consumer, it's interesting. All of these topics are very relevant and timely for decisions that my own family is making. So I certainly see the value of making sure in the role of government to set the appropriate conditions and let the competition be what it is, but to have a positive impact on our society. So I know a lot of these topics have been broached, but I'll just start with Mr. Spellmeyer. Looking at the average amount of TV that an adult watches, and then narrowing into the channels. I mean, I think it's most people, if you're like me, probably have somewhere 100, 200 channels, but you're only watching 10% of those. And so, you're basically paying for things that aren't watched, okay? There's been suggestions about kind of an a la carte option for cable, but have your members considered offering additional options? How do you view that problem setting?
Oh, my members talk to me about it every day. As I've indicated, the little secret that consumers don't understand is that the content providers won't let the cable companies offer small packages. They They force you to take the whole suite of programming offered by a particular Disney or Discovery or whoever it may be. And that really hampers our ability to meet consumers' needs, and we'd like to fix that.
We'll go to Mr. LeGeyt. How much of the transmission consent fee is invested in local content versus sent to the network, the big networks?
It varies fairly dramatically depending on the station group and the particular network, but what I can tell you is that at a local level, roughly 40% of a local broadcaster's operating budget is invested in local news and programming.
And maybe just as a follow-on to that, how can government do it better when it comes to the regulatory posture there that ends up resulting in either better options or lower cost?
Well, I think what's extremely important about this, and there's a lot of pressure coming down in terms of the cost of content creation, both on the part of my network members and the sports rights, all the things we've discussed today, as well as the increasing costs of local content. But there is no doubt that the retransmission consent regime of the last 30 years has enabled local stations around the country to reinvest in their local news programming. We are the most trusted. There is a reason for it. And as consumers are cutting the cord, increasingly consuming their content from these cable replacement services, the vMVPDs online, the FCC, the expert agency, needs to take a hard look at how that is going to impact that ability to invest in local. We've asked them to refresh the record in their 2014 vMVPD proceeding.
Okay. I'll stay with you for a follow-on here. We see that media companies who are, they're content creators, they're distributors, they're producers with the consolidation of the online video options, with the consolidation of online video, are the cross-ownership rules still necessary? And go ahead.
No, they are not. And further than that, I would argue that none of the current broadcast ownership rules, at least as written, remain relevant. They are premised on the notion that local broadcasters compete with only other local broadcasters for audience and advertising dollars. That is not the reality that we're competing in today, complicated by the fact that we're also competing with big tech for content costs.
I think I have time for one more, Mr. Schwantes. We've heard a lot about the marketplace, how it's changed, in the last couple of years. Your testimony reflected that. It seems to me that the demands and expectations have probably changed a lot as well. I mean, obviously, I started the statement by our own choices, but what's most important, what do you think is most important to the viewing public, and how are our laws impeding the ability for consumers to have those choices?
In about 12 seconds.
I will say cost is a big one, and choice. I think consumers love all the different streaming services out there. I do think, earlier someone said, I want to deregulate everything. That's not true. I just think we can't take an old regulation from the cable era and apply it to streaming services. I think we need to have a fresh conversation about how we can do better to level the playing field across the board.
Thank you. Time has expired. Yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas's 33rd District for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And look, as someone that covered 3A football for our local paper in Texas, and y'all know how big football is in Texas, understand how important local news is and diversity in media and in our communities across the country is. And I really cannot emphasize enough the importance of having a strong local news presence in every town. A robust local news ecosystem is vital to making sure that both the freedom of expression and a strong democracy is something that stays in place. And while it is true that Americans have access to an inescapable flow of digital news and programming, the sustainability of local news and that ecosystem, I think, is in big danger right now. And it's very important and critical that as we find ourselves in this information landscape in which misinformation runs rampant and facts are harder to come by. So with this backdrop, I hope today's hearing can shed some light on the action items we in the industry can collaboratively take to save trusted local news and journalism while also increasing opportunities for all Americans to benefit from the video marketplace. And so the first question that I had is, I think it's imperative that we not overlook consumers in this conversation, particularly those who are low income or economically vulnerable. While there is no doubt that the outlined streaming options have increased competition and given consumers more choice and lower costs for these services, robust and affordable broadband is necessary to take advantage of these options. And for too many, the cost of internet is still out of reach. As you know, we have the Affordable Connectivity Program that I championed, and this made historic gains in this area. But funding for it is going to run out soon, probably Q2 of next year is what most people have said. And if Congress doesn't provide more funding, we will back that progress and make it harder for 21 million Americans to balance their household budgets each month while subscribing to internet services. And I wanted to ask Mr. Spellmeyer, why is it so important that ACP get refunded?
Thank you, Congressman. ACP has certainly been an important lifeline for many of my members and their customers. Approximately 75% of ACA's member companies have participated in the ACP program. It's going to run out of money, you're correct. There are 20 million households on it today. Congress faces some tough choices that are beyond my pay grade in terms of how to fund it, whether to fund it, and how to change it. But certainly, I would urge Congress to take a close look at it. Many people do rely on it, and I would say there's a whole bunch. If they don't, there's a whole bunch of shutdown and transition issues that are real about how consumers are going to be. You know, one day is just going to go dark and the program's over. How do we deal with prior balances? How do we transition people to different plans? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be thought about in that area once Congress reaches a funding decision.
Yeah. No, thank you. I also want to ask a question about local news, again, being such a trusted outlet for many people, especially I think that when I was growing up and generations before me. And as the co-chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus, there have been a lot of studies about misinformation and around elections and how that proliferates online and jeopardizes our democratic process. And the people in my district often rely on local TV and radio stations to cut through the online noise and offer reliable information on when and where we vote. And I wanted to ask Mr. LeGeyt, can you talk about the important role local broadcasters play in our elections, and specifically the role broadcasters and local journalists play to combat misinformation that spreads online?
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and for acknowledging the role that we're playing. In some ways, you just did it as well as I possibly can. And look, this is our priority. In light of where the state of the newspaper industry in this country, local broadcasters are the source of trusted local information, period. We are doubling down on that localism. We've increased the size of our newsrooms as an industry by 78% over the last decade. And it's absolutely essential because we understand, especially the communities that you've talked about that are victimized by the digital divide, often minority communities that are particularly subject to disinformation. Local broadcast is going to be where they get their information. And so we're providing vetted information not only on the issues, the candidates, but also election processes, where to vote, how to vote. I don't think our role has ever been more important as this disinformation is proliferating online, and we're very, very proud of the fact that we're doing that work, whether it's in school board elections,
I beg your pardon,
local
the gentleman's
office, or
time
national.
has
Thank
expired.
you.
Thank you. And again, for members that have come in, our witnesses unfortunately did not have the light boxes in front of them today, so we're using the gavel at 5 minutes. The gentleman from Florida's 2nd District is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me say that it's been an interesting conversation. Clearly, we needed to have this hearing. I've noticed a competition to maintain customers and to prevent this churning, the month-to-month changes between platforms has increased the cost, I think clearly for consumers. But there are many providers that have short-term packages, allow our consumers to choose what they want, when they want, with just no more than 1 month billing tail. We can unsubscribe at any time and get what we want in that way. I think the programs often jump from, provider to provider, just through free market competition incentives to serve those customers. And I'd like to know I have the right to instantly pivot to another provider that picks up whatever show I like, FSU football, whatever. But I don't want to be locked in for 2 years on something. Another troubling matter emerging in the subscription TV market is, of course, the surge in prices to consumers. I wonder if this can be owed to over-regulation of the marketplace rather than under-regulation. I've seen more disputes, more blackouts, more all these impasses, these days. And I think it's clear that the cable's regulated status has a long history, which intensified when the federal cable rate rules and mandatory channels, the 1992 Cable Act, came out. I note that President Bush 41 actually vetoed that legislation and was unfortunately overridden by Congress. Then Senator Biden was actually one of those override votes on that vote. So I hear many different opinions on how to work through this, the problem of modern video plays. Some people want to level the playing field by increasing regulation. Some people want to deregulate and thereby level the playing field. So I'm going to just ask a couple questions, if I may. Mr. Gandler, I think it's fair to consider a technology-neutral system that is deregulated equally. All right. What are your thoughts on that, and what does that new system look like?
We have a very simple product. We provide just video. We don't bundle it with broadband, telephony, or anything else. So consumers can move in and out. As you said, it's frictionless. We offer trials. We offer different packaging. We offer diversity packaging. We have packaging for different groups of people across the United States in different languages. But we are technology neutral. We're focused on technology. We are a software platform, I would say. We are agnostic to Roku or...
And it sort of seems that we all are these days, software consumers, right? I mean, yes, I have Starlink at my house. Yes, I have cable, fiber. So...
Well, it's not all software, sir. If you take companies like Samsung, they have a TV. That TV is a platform, so that is a device. There are companies like Amazon that have sticks, and Roku sticks is another example of a platform that has 50 to 70 million customers at this point. We are pure play software. We move in your home. If you have multiple different TV sets or sticks, you can move seamlessly from programming.
Fair to say that you're for deregulation.
Correct, sir.
Very good. Mr. Spellmeyer, in your testimony, you correctly outlined a dramatic increase in cost, in particular the retransmission consent fees. In addition, consumers seem to have to, they get billed for these inflated costs. Would you say these costs restrict the ability to carry diverse viewpoints from independent programmers unaffiliated with broadcast networks?
Yes, sir, it absolutely does. It eats up resources that could otherwise be devoted to that programming. It also eats up capacity on cable networks to the extent they are capacity limited in some systems.
And I think you've actually addressed that as I sat here and listened, but I wanted to ask that question because I wanted everybody to understand that I care about your answer to that question. In the remaining 20-some seconds, Mr. LeGeyt, my district gets hammered by hurricanes occasionally, not since last week. My constituents depend on emergency alerts. Can you please talk about the broadcaster's role in that situation?
In 10 seconds.
Thank you for the question. We are free. We are always on. We are lifelines in those times of emergency when other networks fail. And frankly, I think Deregulation in some areas will help us to do even more of that. Continued regulation in some others will also help. But importantly, I think it's premature for this committee to be thinking about legislation. The FCC has the ability to examine those regulations and make some of those determinations for the benefit of our ability to serve your constituents.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida's 3rd District for 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing before the committee. I actually am fascinated by this issue because it is so rapidly changing, this environment, that it's hard to keep up. And so, as a cord cutter myself, I just call me Twitter-pated. I'm sure my staff loves that right now. So jumping right into it, Mr. Gandler, in your testimony, you mentioned that FUBU plans to introduce AI products that is designed to enhance the customer or the consumer experience. Can you detail what that might look like?
Sure. Well, as I said initially, we're very focused on the consumer experience, and one of the ways we gauge that is by the level of engagement with our product relative to any other product in the marketplace. And as I stated, we're roughly at about just over 100 hours per household of our product. So the goal with AI and machine learning is to better index all the programming, to better understand what people are watching, and to help with discovery of additional program, which I think will help as we create more channels. We have no capacity issues, so basically if we wanted to, we could have 400, 500, 1,000 channels that people can access at any given time.
Well, and I think AI is going to have a profound effect on programming moving forward very quickly that most people don't even recognize. So talking more broadly on the issue, right back to you, Mr. Gandler, and then LeGeyt. Did I say that right?
You did.
Hey.
Thank you.
All right. You both have touched on AI in your testimony. So question to you both, what benefits, risks included, does AI pose to the video marketplace moving forward?
So maybe I'll start. In my view, I think it puts the power into the user's hands. Very different from social media where algorithms decide basically what you see. And the way we're developing it is actually going to allow the user to decide what they want. So basically, if you were a fan of Lionel Messi, who's now in the news all the time, you could basically say, show me everything Lionel Messi, and it will look for clips in news segments on any channel, Spanish language, English language. So it's actually a pretty interesting tool to be able to really drive discovery.
Okay.
I'm going to focus on the impact on local broadcasting.
All right.
And certainly there are some opportunities for hyperlocalism, some efficiencies in the way we write scripts that hopefully will enable more boots on the ground for the locally focused reporting and rebuild that only people can do. But we do have several policy concerns. I mean, the first is we already have issues in the big tech landscape with our content being accessed online, not being fairly compensated for that local content. That is going to be potentially exacerbated by AI. Absolutely. That's scraping. Second, the image and likeness of our personalities, media personalities, both on a local and national level, ensuring that those are protected, very much top of mind for all of our members. And third, we are the most trusted medium by all studies. And the challenges to newsrooms of vetting stories that are littered with AI-generated content, some of which will be difficult to decipher, we've got to make sure we've got the resources in place to do that well. So all of these challenges we're navigating and look forward to working with Congress on.
Well, and you touched on an issue that I'm really curious about is the liability issues that come with using AI generatively. I was actually recently abroad and saw my very first 24/7 AI-generated anchor, and I thought that was fascinating. But I mean, with the benefits also come the risks. You hit on some of the copyright issues and whatnot. More on the risk side, I mean, has there been anything from the... I know, Mr. Spellmeyer, there's so much that we could get into, and I only have 55 seconds. Real quick, can you hit on the risk that we have to look at mitigating from the liability of the streaming services utilizing AI and the essentially crowdsourcing of it?
Well, I think it's just ensuring that everyone in this landscape has the right mechanisms in place to ensure that likeness... it's one thing if it's truly an AI-generated likeness of a news anchor. It's another thing if it's an image of Lester Holt. and the viewer believes it's Lester Holt, but it's not. And so I think this is going to require a lot of work. It's already being done by many of our companies, but a lot of work to figure out how we ensure that our role as the most trusted isn't somehow undermined by consumer confusion.
And I can't believe my 5 minutes are up, so I will submit the remainder of my questions to you all in writing. And with that, I yield back.
The lady yields back the balance of her time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio's 6th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love this discussion about AI. I almost want to go off script here and dig into that a little bit. I can tell you there's two things I'm not going to do. I am not going to fly on an airplane that's flown by an AI pilot, and I'm not going to be diagnosed by a doctor that says he's an AI doctor to diagnose my medical condition, because I know how it works. Mr. LeGeyt, a few years ago, Congress permanently extended Stellar, the satellite television reauthorization bill. As part of that process, Congress reaffirmed the value of having local broadcast channels available to viewers in their local markets. We also made some other changes, like allowing small cable television providers to band together to jointly negotiate with large broadcast groups. Today, we're holding this hearing to talk about changes that have happened to the video marketplace since then, specifically regarding streaming and over-the-top services. So, Mr. LeGeyt, can you speak to your member company's position on how local broadcast stations should interact with streaming services and what you see as the biggest opportunities and the biggest threats to local broadcasting thriving over the next few years?
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate your reference to Stellar and this committee's work on that bill 4 years ago, because principally what it did, and we were strong supporters of it, including the relief that it provided for small cable companies, but principally what it did was reaffirm the importance of retransmission consent in allowing local stations across the country to invest in local programming and news. This is all very complicated in asking how those rules of the road should apply to the current cable replacement services that are happening on the streaming side, including Fubo. Within my membership, we don't have consensus as to what that answer is. But what we are asking is for the FCC, which has an open proceeding on this, to refresh the record in that proceeding, to ask some of these very same questions, and to begin looking at these very difficult questions.
Okay. Mr. Spellmeyer, I share your view and the view of many of my colleagues that Congress should be looking at how to deregulate rather than adding additional players to an antiquated system in order to try and level the playing field and have a fair, competitive environment that meets the needs of the current video marketplace. You've also shared your concerns with retransmission consent framework, particularly for smaller providers, and noted the concerning trend of increased blackouts when broadcasters and TV providers are unable to reach an agreement. This is a big issue that impacts viewers in Eastern Ohio and all over the country. As you know, in 2019, Congress amended the Communications Act to permit small MVPDs, those serving no more than 500,000 subscribers nationally, to form buying groups to negotiate retransmission consent with large station groups. In your view, has this ability to form these groups in order to negotiate and buying, has that been effective?
As I said earlier in response to another question, the answer is yes. It has helped. Thank you to Congress for taking the action that you took in 2019 in Stellar. The negotiations that came out of that happened relatively quickly after the passage of the bill, like 3-4 months later, in the retransmission consent cycle. It's like a cycle of every 3 years where we negotiate retrans. And so it happened very quickly. It produced some positive results, although not as much as we had hoped. And we're in the middle right now of heading into another one of those that will occur between now and the end of the year. And there will be some risk of blackouts. My members want to avoid that, and we want to come to agreement and keep customers online.
Okay.
stations online for customers.
Okay. Mr. Gandler, what strategies do you employ to attract and retain subscribers in a competitive market with various streaming options?
Well, basically, it all comes down to product. Fubo is #1 in customer satisfaction among live TV service providers, according to J.D. Power. So we really focused on developing the technology, ensuring people are able to gain value from the it's not a cheap subscription, as you know, and so it's very important that we very quickly highlight the number of channels that people have access to, and also ensure that we're tracking what they're watching and making sure that they're easily available to them.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and looking around, we have no other members wishing to ask any questions at this time. I want to first of all thank our witnesses. You can tell this has been a great hearing, and we said it was going to be educational. We need to get more information out. So I think it's very important for all of you who have been with us today. We really appreciate your time. And at this time, I do ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list, and without objection, so ordered. I also remind members they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on September the 27th, and without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.